Bo Taijun, or Bon Taijun, is an ultra-small is developed based on the idea of strengthening the human body in combat uniforms. As the full name of Armored Mobile Master Slave System, Armored Mobile Master Slave System, commonly known as Armslave, Strike Air Force, is a comparison that Kraft dreamed of in his dream, unscientific humanoid robot collectively. According to the corner revealed in the dream, Kraft understands that there is a special kind of human called listener in that world, who can inexplicably master some black technology that is not within the scope of their original cognition. Does it sound a bit like Kraft's dream? Most of the production technology of as well as the driver system that can convert the driver's mind energy into weapon energy, are all developed by the black technology that the listeners hear. The level of nonsense is no better than Kraft's dream. Since Kraft even made Lord Bo Tai, ordinary as is not a problem, but Tony Stark uses exoskeleton armor, and it is difficult for him to take out those large robots to bully people, and Bo Tai Jun was also stuffed by Kraft with some other Dreamland technologies, so he wouldn't be afraid of those large mechas when he really fought. In the invention similar to exoskeleton armor, except for Mr. Bo Tai, Kraft only built a pair of Ultraman armor, but that thing will expose his body shape, and secondly, he has high requirements for his own physique. Wearing this kind of armor in dreams is either an alien or a transformed person. Although with the assistance of Angela and Harrow, Kraft didn't have much problem with his control, but it was still difficult to reach the level shown in the dream, so Kraft had not made up his mind to treat his body. In the case of starting, even if the armor is built, the true strength can't be displayed much. But then again, the shape and design ideas of Ultraman armor are actually quite similar to Tony Stark's body. There is also an LED light on the chest, which is the shape of the face. Taking a closer look at the mask on Tony Stark's face, Kraft blurted out. Running around ba? Fumafumo. Kraft's self-talk was transformed into this strange voice again through the conversion of Mr. Bo Tai. There is no way for Kraft with this strange setting, just like those illogical artifacts and technologies in the Dreamland. Bo Taijun's sound device can only emit fu and mo, no matter how Kraft is tossed. These two sounds, and as long as the sound conversion is turned off, Mr. Bo Tai will be down. Fortunately, Kraft didn't have the desire to talk to Tony Stark, and he didn't care if he could speak. But he didn't care. Tony Stark couldn't care less. Wait. Are you talking about testing with this weird thing? Are you serious? Kraft drew out the electric shock baton equipped by Lord Bo Tai, set up his posture, and expressed his intentions with actions. Oh. Stop it. I don't have the time to play with children. However, Tony Stark didn't mean to catch up. He shook his head, actually a little angry inside. He felt that the inventor of the Red Queen was playing tricks on himself. Seeing that Tony Stark was about to leave, Kraft decided to do it directly. He shouted as a reminder, and then controlled Bo Taijun to rush up, picking up the electric shock baton in his hand and hitting Tony Stark on the head. Go. Fumo, take the move, be careful, sir. With the speed of Bo Taijun's explosion, Tony Stark had no time to react. So even if Jarvis reminded him in time, Stark could not stop Kraft's attack. He just raised his arm a little and the electric shock baton had already hit him. On his head. With a clear creak of gold and iron, Tony Stark was thrown away by Kraft with a stick. Fumafumofu. Make you underestimate me. Kraft held an electric shock baton in one hand and pointed to the smashed Tony Stark, and made a provocative gesture of cutting his throat near his neck with the other. Well, it looks like I underestimated you. Stark shook his dizzy head and got up from the ground. The stick just didn't cause much damage to Stark, but the sound of the bang made his brain hum. Jarvis. Remember to remind me to optimize the filtering function of the steel battlesuit after I go back. Okay, sir. Then next, let's have a good time, boy. Stark raised his palms to Kraft, gritted his teeth and said. If you lose, don't cry and go back to your mother. Fumafimomo, who won't necessarily lose. Kraft pointed his middle finger to Stark, but Bo Taijun only had a bulging palm and no fingers, so he could not convey his meaning. With Tony Stark's clever head, definitely can easily guess what Kraft just made. Jarvis. Adjust the output to 15%. No, it's 30%. It is better to educate the children. Whether it's Bo Taijun's styling, or those slightly childish actions, it shows that the age of the driver does not seem to be very large, so Stark does not intend to be too serious. The white light in Mark II's palm flashed, and an arc pulse was released towards Kraft. Kraft stretched his hand back and took out a mini explosion-proof shield from Bo Taijun's tactical vest, and then used the magnifying lamp installed on Bo Taijun to enlarge it, and stood in front of him to block Stark's arc pulse. Hey! Where did he take out this shield? With Bo Taijun's chubby hand obscured, Stark didn't even see how the explosion-proof shield appeared. Even the camera on the steel battlesuit could not capture the specific picture, but the zooming process was still captured. Arrive. The other party seems to have a way of zooming in and out, sir. Zoom in and zoom out. Where have I heard of this technique? Stark was stunned for a moment, but before he had time to remember, he saw the funny puppet leaping towards him with a stick in one hand and a shield in the other. Really an impatient kid. Putting this one aside beforehand, Stark flew up under the control of the steel battlesuit. Can you still hit me like this? Stark didn't see any jets or other devices on this limp puppet. If the opponent can't fly, it can only be a target. Tony Stark's face showed the bad uncle's trademark smile. Unfortunately, not 2 seconds after he laughed, the expression on his face froze, because the ridiculous puppet robot didn't use any spray device, so it flew lightly. Anti-gravity device. Tony Stark was so shocked that Tony Stark forgot to dodge Kraft's attack. When he heard Jarvis's reminder that he wanted to evade, the electric shock baton in Kraft's hand had hit Tony Stark's head. State, anti-gravity technology. This thing is still a fantasy in the real world, but in the dream world, there are too many related technologies. Excluding those mysterious floating technologies and material limitations, there are no fewer than 10 floating technologies that Kraft can replicate now, so Stark thought he could take advantage of the dominance of the air. Too much. Can you stop hitting me in the head? Uncle Tony, I'm older, and heavy metal rock is a bit too exciting for Uncle Tony. Stark stabilized his figure after flipping 2 somersaults in the air, and flew up again, touching his buzzing head, and discussed with Kraft. Fumo, no problem, Clough nodded, put away the electric shock baton and explosion-proof shield in his hand, and took out a shark-shaped rocket launcher and carried it on his shoulder. Oh. Shit. Looking at the hideously shaped bazooka launcher and the large cannonballs that were launched from it that were much larger than ordinary rockets, Tony Stark turned around and ran. As a trial machine, the Mark had no other weapons other than the arc pulse hand cannon. He didn't plan to use that big scary shell to test the defensive power of the Mark on his body. The kid now has such a dry temper. Mark E made a beautiful rollover flight in the air, avoiding Kraft's fishbone rocket launcher. The shells that did not hit Stark continued to fly high, and then exploded violently in the sky. Bang! Huge amounts of golden fireworks lit up the entire coast, and countless sparks fell from the sky, like a heavy golden rain. Well, although I like pranks, overall, he is still a good boy. Tony Stark, who knew he was being tricked, shrugged and raised his palms at Kraft, who had replaced another heavy machine gun. Wait. My armor has just been built, and there is no armor on it, so... Stark asked in a negotiated tone. Should we talk about fighting skills? Although Kraft Cow had gotten 2 sticks before, it was only because he was unprepared, and Tony Stark also learned a little boxing from his bodyguard, Harpy, so he didn't think he was getting close. We'll lose to a puppet in the physical battle. Kraft thought for a while, took back the 6-barreled Gatling in his hand, and put on a fighting posture. Fumo. Yes. Don't you use the previous stick? Stark pointed to Taijun's chubby hand, and kindly reminded him, your soft fist shouldn't be powerful, right? Fumo. Take the move. Kraft didn't explain much, and Bo Taijun's voice system couldn't make him explain anything, so he chose to rush straight up and let Tony Stark experience the power of the driver system firsthand. Fumo. Black Tiger digs his heart. The driver system converts the driver's emotions into a special energy to attach to the as in the weapon used. After several attempts, Kraft found that he shouted some Nirvana skills when attacking. The name can effectively strengthen one's own emotional output. Although he is a little bit ashamed, he can't understand Bo Taijun's language anyway. Facing Kraft's menacing punch, Tony Stark subconsciously raised his arms and crossed them in front of him. Boom. The soft fist hit Stark's arm, making a sound of huge amounts of. Along with it, there was a huge force far beyond Stark's expectation, which passed through the iron skin of the steel battlesuit to his body. WTF. The entire head of Tony Stark who was knocked out was dumbfounded. It could be said that the puppet's performance was excellent because of its huge power, but what's the destructive power? Tony Stark glanced at the status of Mark displayed on the screen. It showed that the arms he just used to make a punch had been damaged to a certain extent. The power of this punch was higher than that of the previous electric shock baton. Phew. What kind of weird technology is this? In the past, Tony Stark used all kinds of black technologies to shock others. Today, he understands how those people felt. Originally, he just wanted to meet the people behind Hong Empress, to see if he could be a little surprised. Now it seems the surprise is a bit too much. Stark cheered up and set up the boxing posture he had learned from Happina. Come on boy. Uncle Tony, I'm getting serious now. Then he was chased by Kraft and beaten violently. Just a few days of boxing with bodyguards wanted to use it to teach Kraft. Tony Stark also wanted to be blind. Although Kraft didn't know much effort, he spent 2 days in Hell's Kitchen with a bunch of bad boys. A small fight, a big fight in 3 days, taught me a lesson that a half bucket of water like Stark was not easy to catch. Mr. Tony Stark is melancholy now. From the time he met Mr. Kraft's bow tie, the test slid like a farce. If it could, Stark would have wanted to end it, but it was really going to end, and Mr. Stark was very unwilling to be reconciled. Because from the beginning to the end, he was being hit and beaten by the funny puppet under the control of the unknown kid, and surrendered in such a farce battle, which was unacceptable for the arrogant Tony Stark. Sir, Miss Pepper's call. The voice of Jarvis sounded in time, and Stark finally found an excuse. Wait. I'll answer the call. He quickly stopped Kraft's chasing him. Stark couldn't wait to get Pepper's call. Hi, little Pepper, is something wrong with the company? Pepper on the other end of the phone frowned. Are you sick? Tony. He actually took the initiative to ask about the company. If it weren't for the sound and tone of voice on the phone as usual, Pepper would have thought he had called the wrong call. Well, I was a little confused just now. Stark, who was choked, rolled his eyes, and fooled it casually. So, what's the matter with you calling? It's not an important thing. Pepper heard Tony Stark's perfunctory, but she understood that if he didn't want to say it, it would be useless to ask yourself. Just now you suddenly exploded a huge amounts of firework. Tony, did you have a party at home? Oh no, how come? Tony Stark denied. Unlike before he was kidnapped, he plans to take care of it now, so he doesn't want Pepper to misunderstand him. I just put a firework to celebrate. Celebrate mine. Well, freshman, yes. That's it. Well, Tony, no matter what you are celebrating, please be quiet. The shareholders of Stark Industries can no longer withstand the excitement. Okay, I get it. Just when Pepper was surprised at how he became so talkative, Tony Stark had cut off the call and shrugged to Kraft. Have you heard it too? There was too much noise before, or let's end it like this, and we'll start again when we have time. Stark didn't talk about winning or losing, and Kraft didn't care. He recorded the battle scenes anyway. Fumo. Okay. Clough nodded, and then controlled Bo Taijun to fly into the sky. A beam of light suddenly shot out from the empty sky, shining on Bo Taijun, as if guiding him into the invisible plane. Then Tony Stark watched the funny and powerful puppet shrink quickly until it disappeared. Is it really a Pym particle? After returning to his mansion, Tony Stark asked Jarvis to search for information, and found the relevant information about the technology that can zoom in and out. But isn't that stubborn old man always hostile to Stark Industries? Dr. Henry Jonathan Pym, also known as Hank Pym, once discovered a subatomic particle that can change the file size of an object, and named it Pym particle, with his own name, and founded his own company Pym Technology. It's just that this old man seems to have an enemy with his father Howard Stark. He didn't give him a good face after several meetings. He also criticized Stark Industry in the media. With Tony Stark's arrogance, naturally he wouldn't have any good feelings for Hank Pym. Could it be that old man's child? But it's wrong. If it's a member of the Pym family, it shouldn't be so friendly to me. Although he was beaten by Kraft, Tony Stark could feel that the other party did not have any malicious intentions. Okay, it's still a little bit. It's just that the little bit of malice is the level of prankster Bear Kid. It's really not like the attitude of Hank Pym's descendants who see themselves as enemies. And Stark also specifically inquired that Dr. Pym only has an adult daughter and one student, and there are no other descendants, let alone minors. Sheesh. I didn't expect this old guy's daughter to be pretty. Seeing the photo of Hope Van Dyne, Tony Stark couldn't help whistling. Then, that kid is unlikely to be related to the old man Pym. Stark touched his chin and murmured and analyzed. That's right, the Pym particle was only discovered by the old man. Since he can find out, then others can naturally find it. Although I misunderstood the source of Kraft's ability to transform the file size, Tony Stark's overall idea is still okay. So after excluding the possibility of Dr. Pym's descendants, Stark began to search for information on some of the more famous geniuses. Among them, naturally there is also the chief designer of Kraft, the Dream Toy Company. And in Tony Stark's heart, Kraft's suspicion is still the highest. There are obviously more suspicious than him, But Stark somehow believes that he is the driver of the funny ragdoll mecha just now, he himself in fact. Everyone is a little puzzled by this intuition. Maybe it's because you are a loyal customer of that kid's product? After making Kraft the highest suspicion, the more you analyze Stark, the more he feels that it is him. Juvenile genius, rich in family, and living in New York, the most important thing is that judging from the pile of weird props on Kraft's dexterous channel, this kid is obviously a master with innocent ideas, then he will make it make sense to have a puppet-type exoskeleton armor. And his mischievous behavior has also been explained. It's not a secret that Kraft Lee is biased against people other than yellow skin. Tony Stark asked Jarvis to check it casually, and he knew the cause and effect, although it was only information processed by Martin Lee, but it was enough to support Stark's guess. However, although Tony Stark has basically determined Kraft's identity, he has no plans to pull his vest, because Kraft broke his own firewall but did not invade further, so he naturally also has to respect the other party's privacy. Since he didn't want to reveal his identity, Stark wouldn't take the initiative to disclose it either. Definitely this is also related to Kraft's age. If Kraft were an adult now, Tony Stark would not have such a good temper. Kraft at the moment didn't know his identity had been guessed by Tony Stark. After returning to his studio, he was doing somersaults there excitedly. Although Kraft is not a fan of Tony Stark, he still admits the level of business of this playboy, not to mention that he has built an exoskeleton mecha that is not inferior to his own dream creation. Stark had a meal, and it was absolutely impossible for Kraft to not be excited. After definitely getting excited, Kraft is also a little scared. Since he has assembled a lot of equipment for himself in the microfactory, he is more or less drifting. Although he doesn't think he is invincible, he still looks a little bit invincible. Not in those so-called technology companies, but Tony Stark's steel battlesuit made him calm down again. Don't look at today, he was chasing Tony Stark violently, but Kraft didn't think that the steel battlesuit was nothing more than that. Tony Stark didn't even paint and didn't have much weaponry on his body. Obviously this armor is only an initial version. Backed by Stark's genius and Stark Industries funds and munitions, it is too easy to improve the combat effectiveness of that armor. And Tony Stark is just a relatively famous scientist. There are so many scientists in the world who are at the same level as him, as well as research teams supported by various countries and forces. Who knows if there are similar Black the Tech Tycoon hides in the dark? Let alone other things, isn't Hulk a living example? In addition, Kraft also found his shortcomings' physical fitness cannot keep up. When the fighting tempo increased to a certain level, Kraft's reaction speed could not keep up, basically relying on the assistance of Angela and Harrow. In this regard, he felt that Tony Stark should be similar to himself, although the effect was not significant, but still somewhat lack of flexibility. And there is no sense of participation. If Kraft doesn't want to experience the fun of driving mechas, then why should he make these mechas that need to be controlled by the driver, and directly make them into self-disciplined robots and control them by artificial intelligence? It's only a 5-year-old boy. There is also the problem of energy. In fact, Tony Stark didn't call to stop at the time, and Kraft couldn't support it for long. Although there is artificial intelligence to solve the control, the driver system uses emotional energy, which requires Kraft. Tay has been concentrating, otherwise the fists thrown by Mr. Bo would be useless. Not to mention that Kraft would yell in two voices from time to stimulate his emotions, and his physical exertion is also quite large. Angela, make me an exercise plan first. Kraft thought about it for a long time, but still failed to persuade himself to study human body strengthening. The shadow of childhood is not so easy to overcome, so he can only step back first. After two scientists, who mastered black technology, had a cordial and friendly exchange secretly, they both left this little matter behind, but it caused a certain name that is still very long and confusing. Attention of the agent organization. After all, Tony Stark didn't hide when he was flying around New York before. Since Kraft can spot him, S.H.I.E.L.D., an intelligence organization, can naturally. What's more, Kraft later put a so eye-catching firework. Fortunately, Tony Stark's villa is remote enough. Occasionally a few cameras that might be able to take pictures here are also hacked by Angela, so S.H.I.E.L.D. now only knows that Stark has made a Tin Man. Kraft's existence is not exposed. Let me keep an eye on Tony Stark's movements. The former and current S.H.I.E.L.D. directors gave exactly the same orders to his subordinates. Black Charcoal Head Nick Fury arranged the 7th-level agent Black Widow Natasha Romanoff to Pepper's side under one pass. It wasn't that he didn't want to arrange someone to be with Stark, but that the playboy had been staying at home recently and didn't know what he was doing. He had no chance to contact him at all, so he had to do so first. As the former director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and one of the leaders of Hydra, Alexander Pierce, after learning about Nick Fury's actions, stopped doing unnecessary things. Anyway, Fury found out that he could share the information, so why bother to waste that strength? Tony Stark, who didn't know he was being targeted, at the moment was upgrading his steel armor in his home. To be precise, it should be a new one. The first thing Mark E must solve is naturally the high-altitude freezing problem, which is not difficult for Stark to do. Then there is the issue of firepower, which is not a problem for the former arms dealer Tony Stark. The next step is to solve the sound filtering problem that makes his brain buzzing. Stark first asked Jarvis to add a layer of soundproof cotton to the inside of the armor. After calculations, it may still be a little noisy. He added it again to be safe. A layer of shock-absorbing and cushioning material. However, because of the addition of these two layers of materials, the shape of the mark looks much burly. Although it is not as bloated as the mark, it is still a big one. If it is only added to the helmet alone, it became a strange shape with a very big head. This is a little bit different from what I thought. Compared to this burly shape, Tony Stark prefers the close-fitting streamlined design of Mark. After considering it again and again, Stark removed the relatively thick sound insulation cotton, and decided to develop a separate anti-bear child armor, and then install the sound insulation cotton design. Sir, I think you can try vibranium, Jarvis suddenly reminded. Oh, right. Stark patted his forehead. He had forgotten that there was Wakanda. Although the price of vibranium was high, it was nothing to Tony Stark. Do we have stock? You bought some for experimentation, and there is still a little left. Jarvis replied with a sharp glance. It is not enough to make a whole steel battlesuit, but I think you can just mix it in the helmet, sir. I'll buy him a 1-ton or 2-ton one first. It's not enough. The big dog Tony Stark waved his hand and happily asked Jarvis to place an order for him. Sorry, sir, Wakanda's vibranium is sold in limited quantities, but it can also be purchased from smugglers, but the quantity is temporarily uncertain. Then try to buy as much as you can. Stark didn't care, anyway, it was enough for him to build a battle armor. As for Mark E, vibranium can only be mixed in some of the more important parts first, and titanium alloys are used in other places. Stark plans to wait for the new vibranium to arrive, and then start working on Mark IV. He, Tony Stark, is not bad for money. The design continues. What needs to be solved is the problem of close combat. Tony Stark not only input a lot of fighting technique data into Mark, but also equips its limbs with small jets that can only adjust the angle to increase the attack of each action. Power. Add another electric shock device. Thinking of the peculiar power attached to Bo Taijun's soft fist, Tony Stark snapped his fingers and said to Jarvis. Finally, to paint the battle armor, the low-key Tony Stark was inspired by his classic car and chose a simple red and gold color scheme for Mark E. Okay, it will take about 5 hours. After all the design was completed, Jarvis gave the production time. At this time, Stark saw on TV about a reception hosted by him, but he did not know about it. I heard a reporter on TV saying, no one expects him to be there. So Stark decided to temporarily participate in this cocktail party that didn't know what was going on. However, when he was excited about the reception, he got a news that made him feel bored. Stark Industries was still selling weapons, and the buyer was the same group of terrorists who attacked him in the Middle East. After returning to his mansion, Stark decided to put on Mark E and personally go to the Middle East to eliminate the group of terrorists. Kraft, Stark is here again. After beating Tony Stark, Kraft paid special attention to his Tin Man, so Angela reported it to Kraft the first time the steel battlesuit appeared over New York. Roar. Roar. What's the situation? According to the training plan, Kraft, who was shutting himself in the treadmill, asked breathlessly. Not sure for the time being. Angela switched to the radar screen and projected the screen onto the wall in front of Kraft. It is preliminarily speculated that his target should be the small town of Jumeirah in the Middle East. While talking, Angela broadcasted the latest news from the town of Jumeirah to Kraft. So, he is going to roar to fight terror, divide, element. Kraft ran out of breath, sweating profusely with his hands on the railings of the cage. Speaking of Angela, can you help me first and turn this thing off? Roar. I'll wait and make it up again. Sorry, Kraft, your treadmill is not connected to the internet. I can't control it. Besides, you only need to hold on for another 4 minutes and 37 seconds to end it. Kraft. Hey. I must have had my brain watts to make this kind of inhuman treadmill. 4 minutes later, the exhausted Kraft climbed out of the wrecked treadmill. Supplement energy, supplement energy. Harrow thoughtfully held a can of energy drink and ran up to him. Lying on the ground to rest for a while, Kraft got up from the ground, sipping the energy drink from Harrow, and pacing slowly in the laboratory. Where is Stark now? The target has left the territory of America. Angela switched out of the radar screen again, and a small spot of light was moving towards the Mediterranean at a speed visible to the naked eye. If the guess is correct, it is expected to reach the destination in about 3 hours. It's pretty fast. Kraft took a sip of an energy drink. He didn't show such a fast-moving speed when he played against Stark before, but that's right. With Stark's arrogant personality, it is not his style to run away all the time. So he intends to avenge those who kidnapped him? Kraft didn't think that Tony Stark ran to the Middle East wearing a steel battlesuit at night to introduce new equipment to the group of so-called freedom fighters or to do after-sales services. No, maybe this can be regarded as after-sales service. Anyway, the netizen, who had made an appointment, Kraft raised his energy drink toward the small light spot on the screen. Wish. Wuyan Longchong. To deal with the group of terrorists who bought Stark Industrial Munitions, Tony Stark flew back with Mark E. Although I don't know why he was not spotted by the military radar when he left America, but when he returned, he was caught by the radar. So the military sent 2 F-22s to intercept him. In fact, after acquiring Wakanda's technology, the armaments of all countries have improved a lot, but because of this, they have eliminated the weapons that were bought at a high price. Most countries are reluctant, and it is because they have not replaced them with the latest fighters. Otherwise, Tony Stark is afraid that it will not be so easy to get rid of the pursuit of the Air Force. With the intervention of Stark's friend Colonel James Rhodes and the SHIELD agent, Tony Stark returned to his home without danger, but he was also discovered by Pepper Potts. After a quarrel between the two, the veteran Aquaman Tony Stark finally persuaded Pepper and asked her to go to Stark Industries to steal information on the arms trade. Just as Kraft could not do anything about other important databases, Stark Industries is an independent closed network. Even with the help of Jarvis, Tony Stark cannot invade this network that does not establish contact with the outside world. In a dream, Kraft learned a wireless intrusion method from a guy wearing an lead mask, nicknamed a wrench, but it must use a special mobile phone or other device as a carrier, and it must be in the intrusion can only be carried out near the target network. In fact, Tony Stark has similar methods, but he doesn't usually like to go to the company. Now he has been kicked out of the company by the board of directors, and there is no reason to return to Stark Industries. As soon as he appears, the guy in the company who secretly sells weapons will hibernate, so he can only give this dangerous task to the little Pepper he trusts most. Pepper successfully stole the information, but it also made Obadiah Stine aware of something wrong, so he rushed to Tony Stark's mansion first and snatched the small nuclear reactor from him. I hate sonic weapons. Tony Stark struggled and finally stuffed the first reactor he hammered out in the Middle East into the hole in his chest before he was killed by shrapnel in the blood. After being stunned by the sound problem twice in a row, Stark felt that he must also equip the future Mark IV with a sonic weapon. But before that, the most important thing is to go to Obadiah to settle accounts. Tony Stark shows up again. When Mark E flew out of the villa, Angela reported to Kraft in time. Here again? This guy is really headstrong. Kraft smacked his lips, somewhat envious. In any case, he was just over 15 years old. From the bottom of my heart, he really hopes to be able to show himself to the world, but as a Chinese, he also knew very well that he could not get the official preferential treatment of America like Tony Stark. So, where is our playboy going to fight crime? Picking up 2 dumbbells, Kraft asked while working on today's exercise plan. Although he did not have the mind to transform the human body, the biotechnology in his dreams is not only a way of transformation. There are also many auxiliary technologies such as nutrients and body repair cabins. With the help of these technologies, Kraft's physical fitness improves quickly, and he won't cause any damage to himself due to overtraining. New York. What? Kraft, who was lifting the iron, stopped his movements and looked at the phantom Angela on the workbench with a puzzled look. The location of Tony Stark's fight against crime is New York. Angela repeated it, and then projected the image near the Stark building onto the wall. Who is this large tin can? I have to say, the shape is much more domineering than Stark's. Kraft looked at the Iron Overlord on the screen, and commented. That's why 1 or 2 like to give themselves a whole catfish face. He really can't understand Tony Stark's weird aesthetic. As for the big guy, it's obviously a knockoff. He doesn't even have a light cannon in the palm of his hand. The overall workmanship is pretty rough, and the unpleasant one is the feeling of shoddy and shoddy. He even copied the catfish face together. Obviously, his aesthetic level is not that good. The only advantage is that he is big enough and looks more domineering. From the analysis of on-site recordings, the bigger one should be Obadiah Stani, the major shareholder of Stark Industries. Wow. This is really the betrayal of the people. Tony Stark was too miserable. He was kicked out of the company by the board of directors, and the armor he invented was stolen by his own people. Kraft was a little gloat. It would be fun if the terrorist who attacked him was hired by his own person. After finishing the iron, Kraft sat in a chair, sipping an energy drink, and watched the play while knocking on the seeds. How do you feel? Stark's new armor is not as good as the previous one. Looking at it, Kraft felt that something was wrong. The red and gold armor of Stark was not as good as the silver and white armor that he had fought with before. It was blown by the big armor that looked very low at first sight. There seems to be something wrong with his energy supply system. Angela quickly analyzed Stark's behavioral logic. Stark only used an arc pulse as an attack since its appearance, and then all chose close combat, which caused this situation. The probability of insufficient energy is 73.47%. Could it be that he didn't charge up his reactor since he came back from the Middle East last time? Kraft scratched his head. This is too capricious. Now he is going to be played to death by himself? In the video, Tony Stark also seems to find that this is not the way to go. He turned his head and flew into the sky. Obadiah, unwilling to be outdone, also flew. The ordinary rocket ejector is used. Cut, it's really low. Kraft, who doesn't know that the hungry man is hungry, curls his lips, his expression disdainful. The two tin cans are flying higher and higher, and they can no longer be photographed by the cameras on the street. Do you need to send a Banshee fighter to live broadcast? Angela proposed. Forget it, it's so lively over there now, it wouldn't be good if someone accidentally discovered it. Although it's fun to eat melons and watch the show, Kraft chose to be cautious. However, Tony Stark did not let Kraft wait for too long. After a while, two tin cans fell from the sky and smashed on the top of the Stark building. However, nearby cameras could not capture the situation at the top of the Stark building. Kraft could only rely on the remote camera to see the various sparks and lightning on the roof, and then made up a lively scene in his own mind. Finally, a beam of light soared into the sky from the Stark building, and the powerful electromagnetic pulse stopped all nearby cameras from working, and Kraft's scene was not seen. I don't know what the final result will be. Kraft scratched his chin, curious about the final outcome. The next day, the Stark Industries conference gave Kraft a clear answer. Tony Stark in a suit and leather shoes stood on the stage, took a handcard and said a few words before being silent for a while, and then spoke to the mass media. I am Iron Man. I'm Iron Man. Do you think you are the only superhero? In the evening, Tony Stark returned to his beach house, but was stopped outside the door by a one-eyed bald head that was so dark that it was almost non-reflective. Mr. Stark, there are actually many people like you, but you don't know it. Who are you? A fan of superhero. Stark raised his eyebrows and mocked. He has seen a lot of people who come to find faults inexplicably, but usually there are security guards to deal with these things, and few people can break through the blockade and walk in front of him. As for what the black coalhead said, he was the same person as himself. Stark thought for a while about the mouse puppet that pressed and beat his Mark E, and his mood suddenly became less beautiful. Is my security slack, or did you use any special methods? The one-eyed bald head in front of him was dressed in a black leather jacket. He looked very imposing, not like an ordinary person, and he also mentioned superhero and the like. Maybe he really knew nothing. Faced with Tony Stark's frivolous attitude, Nick Fury couldn't help but draw the corners of his mouth. In fact, he didn't want to stop Tony Stark at the door like a black fan, but he couldn't help it. Tony Stark's home defense system, their shield can't break through. Although it seems that the programmers in their bureau are very hip, but it also makes Nick Fury more determined to want to pull Tony Stark into his Avengers plan. Originally, the defense system in Stark's house was not so strict, but after being invaded by Kraft, he upgraded Jarvis several times, and he was sneaked into the home by Obadiah Stani and almost killed him. And the inspection of personnel entering and exiting is much stricter, which makes it impossible for Nick Fury to sneak into Stark's home to make cups as expected. The absence of such a compelling appearance in Stark's house quietly caused the situation that Stark does not pay much attention to Nick Fury. Nick Fury, head of S.H.I.E.L.D. Failing to deter Tony Stark as planned, Chief Fury chose to open the door and report directly to his home. S.H.I.E.L.D.? That agent. Phil Coulson. Yes, I was just about to say. Stark snapped his fingers and asked for help without feeling embarrassed. His attitude was a little better. After all, Phil Coulson also helped a lot in the Obadiah incident. Come in and sit down. Stark tilted his head towards Fury, and then opened the door of the villa. Jarvis. Welcome back, sir. Jarvis lit up the lights in the hall, and Stark reached out his hand and led it casually. Just sit down. Do you want something to drink? No, Nick Fury shook his head. As a veteran agent, he basically doesn't eat food outside of his control, even in Tony Stark's house. So, what's the matter with you coming to see me? Stark poured himself a glass of wine and sat down in the middle of the sofa, leaning lazily on it. I want to talk to you about forming the Avengers. The Avengers? What is that? Is the name of the rock band? It feels pretty good. Stark shook the cup in his hand and made a crisp sound of ice cubes hitting the glass. No, that's an organization, or team, with special abilities like you. Nick Fury ignored Stark's teasing and explained to him. Wow, good idea. Stark took a sip of his wine, then cocked his mouth and asked Nick Fury, so, how much salary do you plan to pay me? This is the meaning of rejection. With Tony Stark's worth, S.H.I.E.L.D. can't pay his salary no matter how much money he has. Nick Fury understood the subtext, and he took a deep look at Stark, then stood up and said goodbye. I will come to see you again. Remember to make an appointment next time. Stark lifted the wine glass in his hand, even if it was a farewell. Kraft, who had been soaking in the laboratory recently, came to the Feast homeless shelter built by Martin Lee after a long absence. Speaking of it, this is also related to the guy Tony Stark. Because of his battle with Obadiah, New York City has a lot of wounded. As a charity, Feast shelters, in addition to taking in those homeless people, and occasionally serve as a temporary hospital for the poor who cannot afford the hospitalization. Although Stark Industries has come forward to pay compensation this time, America, especially the hospitals in New York, cannot afford to live only with money, so many patients are still received in the shelters. Originally, this has nothing to do with Kraft, but Alice, a soft-hearted robot, doesn't look at others suffering. After learning about it, she often voluntarily ran to help, because recently the shelter was understaffed, so she ran away. When I arrived at the laboratory, I dragged Kraft, who was playing with a wrench inside. Brother. The patient in bed 5 needs a dressing change. Quinn, help me throw these things in the trash can. When rescuing the patient, Alice was like a different person, with a very strong personality. Not only Kraft, but Quinn was instructed to help him. I'm coming. Looking at Quinn, who ran to the trash can with a bag of garbage in his mouth, Kraft reluctantly took the bandage and medicine and walked to the 5th hospital bed. Could it be that the character I adjusted for Alice will only show up at this time? While Kraft sighed, he expertly changed the dressing of the wounded in bed 5. He was familiar with this kind of thing when he was very young. In the days when he and Martin escaped from the Magia gang, the father and son, he was injured almost every day. Hey, Kraft. Your sister is much cuter than you. You should learn more from her. While he was busy, Peter Parker didn't know where he got out. He reached out and patted Kraft on the shoulder, teasing. Kraft turned his head and glanced at him. Is this Ode? It was the first time that Peter Parker voluntarily came to tease Kraft, which surprised Kraft a bit. It's a pity that Peter's toughness didn't last long. After being glimpsed by Kraft, he seemed to recall his previous tragic experience, and suddenly he went back. By the way, how did you train Quinn? He is so good. From Shin's classmate Peter decisively began to change the subject. However, Kraft didn't talk, but frowned and looked at Peter up and down. What? Quietly moving back half a step, Peter Parker was on guard, and he couldn't help being careless due to Kraft's previous stigma. Kraft continued to stare at Peter Parker in silence, especially when he was scanning his face all the time, looking straight at him. When Peter Parker couldn't help but want to run, Kraft finally spoke. Where are your glasses? Before Peter took the initiative to look for it, Kraft felt that something was wrong, and after a glance at him, he felt that there was something weird, but couldn't tell it. After looking up and down for a long time, he finally discovered the source of the weirdness. The old-fashioned glasses that Peter Parker had been wearing were gone. Oh, this. Peter touched the bridge of his empty nose, and said nonchalantly, didn't I meet a friend this semester? His father is the chairman of the Osborne Group, and the Osborne Group has a medical treatment. The study of myopia requires volunteers, so I participated in it, and it was cured if I was not careful. Oh? Aren't you afraid of being blinded by accident? The friend Kraft that Peter was talking about also knew, and had met a few times, Harry Osborne, a rich boy with a good personality. But Peter Parker is also too bold. He casually ran to participate in this kind of experiment that was not sure and perfect, and he was not afraid of any problems. If he had the courage at ordinary times, he would not always be despised by himself. It's just an adjustment for myopia, not a human experiment, but Kraft still doesn't like this kind of thing. This research has already entered the final stage, so safety is still guaranteed. Even if it fails, it will not cause any harm to the participants. I also borrowed Harry's light to join in. Peter explained a few words, and then patted his forehead as if suddenly remembering something. I have to go over there to help, I'll talk again when I have time. After speaking, he slipped away. I always feel that this guy is hiding something from me. Peter's performance is obviously much more confident than before. Does the treatment of myopia also solve the psychological problems? Kraft shook his head, but didn't pay much attention to it. Maybe it's not necessarily because you successfully soaked in Mary Jane? Reminiscing about Peter's past, Kraft shook his head and laughed. How can it be, roar? Almost noticed something wrong by Kraft. After Peter Parker slipped away, he walked to a remote corner and let out a long sigh of relief, then he knocked his head annoyed. Bah. It's so boring. Why should I be so scared of that kid Kraft? The previous Osborn group's myopia research was definitely deceptive, but it's not unrelated. His myopia disappeared after being bitten by a spider when he visited the Osborn group's product expo. Along with it, there are many enhancements to the physique, the magical sense of crisis, and the ability to walk on the wall at will. It's like a spider. Peter Parker, who had just acquired this peculiar ability for only 2 days, not only taught Lightning Thompson, who has been bullying him in school, but also has a brand new relationship with Mary Jane, which made him feel confident all at once. I am confident that I have seen Kraft today and dare to take the initiative to provoke. Unfortunately, Kraft's accumulated prestige for many years is too strong, and he is not bullying himself with his strength like Thompson, not to mention that there is Aunt May behind him. Backing, so Peter Parker, who ran up to provoke him, quickly calmed down after a casual glance at him, and decisively recognized the way he was running. But after confessing and running away, Peter Parker felt a little embarrassed. He already had a special ability. How could he be easily bullied by a brother 4 or 5 years younger than him? Peter Parker feels that he has retrieved the dignity of being a brother. Wong. A dog bark awakened Peter Parker, who was cheering on himself. He lowered his head and saw a dumb yellow Shiba Inu looking at him with his head tilted. Oh, Quinn, good boy. Why are you here? This very happy-looking and very human-looking dog has recently become the star mascot in the shelter. Peter naturally likes him very much too. He squatted down and rubbed Quinn's head with his nose and affectionately. The tip of his black nose touched. I didn't expect Kraft to raise such a good dog, no. This must be the credit of Alice. That kind of bear kids have no patience to train dogs. Peter Parker teased Quinn and thought with a little bit of envy and jealousy. Big brother. Peter Parker is hiding something from you. Back home, Quinn, wearing a red scarf, immediately made a small report to Kraft. Oh. What's the matter? Kraft asked Alice, who was cooking, casually. He had no curiosity about Peter's secret, but if he knew it, he could be used as a handle to tease him, that would be great. I don't know, he didn't say. Quinn flicked his tail around Kraft's feet. He just said that he was almost spotted by the eldest brother, and he started rubbing my face. Oh, like this. Putting the cut potatoes on the plate, Kraft shook the water from his hand and reached out to touch Quinn's head. Good job, I'll give you an extra meaty bone later. This stupid dog is so diligent in his work, isn't he just wanting to be rewarded? Kraft wanted to reward Quinn, who went to the shelter together today to help, so he went along with the flow and sent him the reward that he was going to give him again. Okay. Thank you, brother. Quinn, who didn't know he had been fooled, happily flung his tail and ran out of the kitchen, and went to Beige's face. After a while, the quarrel between him and the little black cat came from the direction of the living room. Well, Kraft has long been used to it. As early as these two little guys had been in trouble for several times, and after being taught by Kraft, they basically stopped quarreling. Occasionally, Beige would slap Quinn twice because of his impatience. Then hide on the heights and let the defeated dog bark underneath. It smells so good. Not long after, Martin's head suddenly appeared from the door of the kitchen. He smiled and glanced in, and praised, I haven't eaten it before my saliva comes down. Alice's craftsmanship is really good. It's getting better and better. Although I know that Alice is just a robot, this robot is really too caring and sensible. I don't know how taller than Kraft's bear child. Martin Lee also quickly accepted her as a family member. A member of the. After dinner, Kraft, who had been busy in the asylum all day, didn't plan to go back to work in the laboratory. The family sat in front of the TV and chatted while watching some boring TV programs, passing the night away. Then each went back to the room to sleep. And Kraft, dreaming again after a long absence. The scene full of futuristic technology made Kraft full of joy, but the protagonist in the dreamland next saw him stunned. Kraft can be said to have gone through the entire dream with his head in a mess, and when he sat up from the bed, he still maintained a slouching expression. Because of this dream. I've watched this episode. Tom Jerry. Chinese translation, Cat and Mouse. The world's enduring, famous cartoons. Because the cats in the film are always miserable, Quinn is a loyal audience of this animation. On the contrary, Beja dislikes the animation very much and often clamors to scratch the director and screenwriter's faces. Flower. Even when she was watching anime, she was often amused. So although Kraft didn't have the conditions to watch this animation before, and later had the conditions and didn't have any interest in watching it, he also watched many episodes with his family pets and Alice. And he had watched the episode in the dream just now, and he even remembered the name, called Progress and Mechanization. There is another one with the same worldview called Manipulating the Mouse's Life. The main thing in the dream is the manufacturing process of the mechanical cat that is not played in the animation. But that thing doesn't make much sense to Kraft, it's not practical at all, let alone an out-of-control plot appeared in both episodes of the animation. Kraft's brain was drawn to make this funny thing. In fact, a long time ago, Kraft considered whether the world in his dreams is real, because there have been too many magical worlds that can only appear in fantasy literature in dreams. For this reason, he also specially found a lot of parallel worlds, planes, and books like 3000 Worlds, but in the end he found that no matter whether these worlds are real or not, it doesn't seem to have much to do with him. On the contrary, he can get a lot of benefits. It's just that this time I suddenly dreamed of a fantasy world that he had come into contact with in the real world, and was a little shocked. Well, not just a little bit, it was very shocking. But after the shock, it doesn't seem to be a big deal either. You should eat, sleep, play, and your life is the same as before, and Tom Cat on TV didn't jump into reality. Brother, are you okay? This morning Kraft didn't rush to the laboratory uncharacteristically. Instead, he ran to the living room and saw the cat and the mouse. Alice couldn't help but worry in her heart and leaned in and asked softly. I'm okay. Kraft returned to his senses, smiled at Alice, and said, I just want to find inspiration from the cartoons. Breakfast is ready, right? Well, today's breakfast is preserved egg and lean meat porridge. That's great. Easily fooled Alice into the past, Kraft did not take the dream of last night too much to heart, and resumed his daily life habits. In addition to occasionally being dragged by Alice to the asylum to become a strong man. On this day, Kraft was tossing in the laboratory as usual, when Angela's siren suddenly sounded in his ear. The target of special attention, Benjamin Parker, has a life crisis, and the location is near the Wegmans supermarket chain next to Queens Road. What's the situation? Kraft, who was beating in the microbase, dropped his work and controlled the SCV to rush to the apron. Prepare me a Banshee fighter plane. At this time, he didn't care whether he was exposed or not. It was important to save people. The big deal would be to take Martin away. Angela Yeehan prepared the Banshee fighter, and suggested, after my calculations, solar skateboards can also be used in time, and I have made a preliminary plan to minimize the risk of exposure. Immediately afterwards, Angela quickly revealed her plan. Kraft hesitated. Are you sure you can make it? Even if it fails, it is not impossible to remedy it. The result is not much different from using a Banshee. Angela calmly analyzed. Kraft thought about it, so he nodded and said, do as you say. After speaking, he quickly ran out of the microbase. Coming out of the base, Kraft, who had restored the original file size, took the helmet and backpack from the robotic arm, then stepped on the solar skateboard that Angela had prepared for him, stepped on the throttle to the maximum with one foot, and sprinted towards Queens Road. Rush away. I hacked into all the cameras and recording equipment nearby, roughly restoring what happened. While Angela marked the best route for Kraft inside the helmet, she reported to him the situation on Uncle Ben's side. Your Uncle Peter Parker. After listening to Angela's report, Kraft couldn't help but yelled at him, and he was beaten by a punch for his salary and got him back. What the hell is it to avenge you by the hand of a robber? After having ability, waste is still a waste. Although it is not clear what happened to Peter Parker, from his performance in the underground boxing ring, you can probably guess what adventure he has obtained, and his physical fitness has been strengthened. No wonder he has been a little weird recently. But this does not prevent Kraft from despising him. If it is normal, he will laugh at most, but because his waist has put Uncle Ben in a crisis, Kraft can't wait to put him in a wrecked treadmill and shut him down for a month. Kraft's solar-powered skateboard can catch up with cars, but he doesn't need to take a motorway. In addition, Angela's planned route for him is often unusual, so he quickly rushed to the vicinity of Queen's Road. It is also thanks to him that he is exercising during this time, otherwise he may not be able to run down the route planned by Angela with his previous physical condition. Uncle Ben. Peter Parker hugged Uncle Ben, who was lying in a pool of blood, and his heart was filled with regret and resentment towards him. Seeing Uncle Ben's breath getting weaker and weaker, Peter cried out with excitement. Uncle Ben. No. No. The ambulance is coming. Uncle Ben, hold on. However, Uncle Ben did not regain any energy from Peter's cry, and the hand on his shoulder gradually slipped down. Do not, get me out of you idiot. Just as Uncle Ben was about to die, Kraft's slightly dull growl sounded in Peter's ear, followed by the crazy alarm of spider telepathy inside his body. Before Peter's consciousness could react, his body started to move. He slumped down abruptly, a skateboard wiped his hair and flew over from above, and then slammed into the wall of the opposite shop. At the same time, a figure wearing a safety helmet and a shoulder bag on his back fell to his side not far away. After 2 laps, he quickly stood up and rushed to Peter Parker's side. Get out of the way. Uncle Ben can still be saved. Kraft pulled off his helmet with one hand, grabbed Peter Parker with one hand, and tried to tear him away. But today's Peter Parker is no longer what he used to be. The little muscle that Kraft exercised can't push him at all, but fortunately, he heard Kraft's words clearly, and he quickly moved away with a glimmer of hope. The body vacated the position. Kraft pulled the backpack from behind him, then took out something that looked a bit like an electric iron and placed it on the chest of Uncle Ben, who had stopped sucking roar. Goblin Pacemaker XL type. Not only the success rate is higher than the normal version of the Goblin Pacemaker, and it is not so easy to explode. What's more, this one in his hand has been optimized by other Dreamland technologies. While the success rate has increased, the probability of explosion has also been reduced again, and its power is also small. A lot. Kraft pressed the switch, grasping the Goblin Pacemaker XL and pressing it hard. A blue electric light flashed, and Benjamin Parker's stopped heart was beating again. Ha! Roar! After an uncontrollable deep roar sucked, Uncle Ben opened his eyes sharply. Kraft breathed a sigh of relief, but fortunately he succeeded, otherwise he would have to use other means. After pulling Uncle Ben from Gimungwan with the Goblin Pacemaker XL, Kraft took out an injection gun from his bag and stuck it on Uncle Ben's neck to give him a shot of adrenaline. Uncle Ben, who was still weak at first, immediately became energetic. Kraft? Feeling the power surging in the body, Uncle Ben sat up a little bit. You saved me. Don't move. You still have injuries. Kraft grabbed Uncle Ben and let him continue lying down. The ambulance will be here soon. Tell me if you feel uncomfortable. Don't worry, I feel pretty good now. Uncle Ben smiled and lay back obediently. That's because I gave you an adrenaline shot, so you can't feel the pain, but in fact your body is not getting better. This sentence definitely refers to Kraft's humiliation. The original version of that shot of adrenaline is also from Swan's World. The original effect is indeed to exchange the body for combat power, but Kraft has already used the technology of other worlds to reduce its side effects to the lowest, but also added a small amount of body repair medicine. In fact, it's not that you can't add more, but often damage sources such as bullets and shrapnel are still in your body. Great Kraft, thank you for being here. Peter Parker, who was crying with his nose in tears, walked over and thanked Kraft with a look of fear. Humph. Kraft glared at him harshly, then turned his head to ignore him. Originally wanted to ask how Kraft was here, Peter paused, then drew back. Originally it was wrong, and he just received a great favor from Kraft. Peter Parker didn't dare to provoke Kraft, who was obviously in a bad mood at this time. Soon, the ambulance arrived. Kraft and Peter followed in the ambulance and took Uncle Ben to the hospital. After waiting anxiously in the operating room for a while, they and Aunt May, who came later, were finally notified by the doctor that Uncle Ben was out of danger, and Kraft breathed a sigh of relief. Thanks to you, Kraft. Aunt May wiped her tears and hugged Kraft and refused to let go, thanking her incessantly. If Ben is gone, I really don't know if I can survive. Okay, Aunt May, I'm fine with Uncle Ben. Kraft patted Aunt May on the back and comforted softly. Sorry to interrupt. At this moment, a black man in a police uniform came over and pointed at Kraft and Peter twice. You have to trouble both of you to do a transcript with me. Okay, no problem. Kraft nodded characteristically. The policeman had already arrived long ago. just waiting for them. Since he gave face so much, Kraft would naturally not embarrass him, and he did need to explain the pile of props he had shown before. Because Kraft and Peter were not prisoners, the black policeman did not take them back to the police station. Instead, he found an empty room in the hospital and started the transcript. Kraft glanced at the earplugs in his ears. If I remember correctly, there was no such thing before. It seems that America's intelligence department may have begun to intervene, but it is a pity that he can't contact Angela anymore. After joining the plan with an inconspicuous bone conduction headset in his mind, Kraft sat down opposite the black policeman with Peter. The black policeman first asked about Peter Parker, who had witnessed the whole process. Peter Parker also told him about the process of watching the robbers snatch the cash without stopping, but almost killed his uncle. Zhang Quan is regretful. But as for why he appeared in the underground boxing ring, Peter said that he was just curious to take a look, and the black police did not doubt it, but gave him a word of comfort, saying that he did not come forward when facing the gunman. Normal. And Kraft, who already knew that Peter Parker was not what he used to be, snorted disdainfully. If Peter was the weak scholar before, he would not be so angry, but the relationship between the two is still relatively close, so although he was upset, he didn't demolish Peter's desk. After questioning Peter Parker, the black policeman turned to Kraft again. Hello, Kraft. The black policeman first showed a row of white teeth, and proactively reached out to him. Kraft shook hands with him with a puzzled face, and the black policeman explained with a smile. My 2 sons are loyal fans of the mechanical pets you invented. They also joined the school team. When the transcript is over, you must sign me. Hawk and Andy will be happy. Okay, no problem. For fans of his own products, Kraft still has this patience. Ahem. Then let's start the transcript. The black police officer tilted his head slightly. Probably the person in the headset was reminding him, so he cleared his throat and said sternly to Kraft. First of all, how did you know that Benjamin Parker was shot? According to the information received by our police, you should have rushed over from your laboratory on a skateboard from the very first time Mr. Parker was shot. Because of him, Kraft pointed to Peter Parker next to him, and said according to Angela's previous response plan for himself. When he was in the feast shelter a while ago, he was a little weird, and I was a little curious. I put a bug on his body, and I happened to listen to it today, and I heard that he actually ran to watch a boxing match. I planned to turn it off. I heard the robber's robbery again. Kraft shrugged and rejoiced. Fortunately, Uncle Ben's luck is good. Wait. When did you put a bug on me? Why didn't I know? Peter Parker believed it to be true, and didn't know how much Kraft had heard of his secret. You are an invasion of privacy. Why? You still want to sue me? If I hadn't put a bug, Uncle Ben would have been killed by you. Kraft glared back. Peter Parker, who was already resentful, froze in an instant, and he also knew that Kraft was already playing screens. After all, he was not going to watch an underground boxing match, that directly. Join. You can solve the privacy problem in private later, but I can ask, where is your bug now? Take off your shoes. Kraft kicked Peter Parker's left foot and ordered unceremoniously. Peter, who was aggrieved but didn't dare to explode, took off his shoes obediently and handed them to Kraft. Taking the shoe in disgust, Kraft took a button file-sized disc from the sole and showed it to the black policeman. Here, this is it. This listening device, also from Dr. A. Lee, was naturally not glued on as Kraft said, but it was secretly attached to Peter's shoe when he was rescuing my uncle. At that time, Peter was panicked. I didn't notice Kraft's small movements. It's so small. The black policeman opened his eyes wide, exposing a large white of his eyes, and looked a little crippled. He hesitated for a while, and then tentatively asked, do you have any intention to sell this kind of bug to our police? Kraft didn't know if it was the self-assertion of the black policeman or the manipulation of the man behind the headset, but he certainly couldn't sell it. I'm afraid it won't work. Kraft spread his hands, and continued to flicker. This bug has a fatal weakness, that is, its own signal is not strong, and a larger receiving station must be established. You can only receive the information from it in your own laboratory, and the receiving station is not only expensive, and one receiving station can only correspond to one bug, so this thing is actually a failed product. This is not a lie by Kraft. What he did by himself is that it does not have these shortcomings, is small and light, and has a strong signal, but the signal strength of the bugs made by other people according to Kraft's steps is very crotch. It is also necessary to build a large receiving station. It doesn't matter if the distance is definitely close, but that is not much different from the bugs on the market. After a pause, Kraft continued, But if your police are willing to spend money, it's not impossible to get one for you, but I don't think the price-performance ratio is high.
Ah, all right, the black policeman shrugged. I will report to our boss later. As for whether he is willing to pay, it is not my little police officer who can decide.
Turning the full record book over a page, the black policeman continued to ask, then which skateboard you used when you arrived? Solar skateboards on the market are not so fast. Because of safety issues. Kraft looked at the black policeman as if looking at a fool. Solar skateboards and wheelchairs. Most users are underage or disabled. If the speed limit is turned on, what do they do if they have an accident? Just a lawsuit can make Dreamland go bankrupt, do you believe it? Well, what you said does make sense. The black policeman scratched his bare head, agreeing with Kraft's reasons. There is also the pacemaker used to save Mr. Parker, which is also your invention. Yes, the portable pacemaker, unfortunately, has major flaws and cannot be sold. Major defect? Haven't you used it to save Mr. Parker? The black policeman asked curiously. I can only say that Uncle Ben's luck is indeed good. Kraft smiled and stroked his nose. That thing is not very stable yet, it may explode. It will explode? The black policeman hadn't reacted yet, but Peter Parker on the side jumped up. How dare you use such a dangerous thing on Uncle Ben? Nonsense. Uncle Ben didn't have roar at the time. What can I do without this gamble? Kraft yelled back righteously again, and Peter Parker slumped down again. In the final analysis, Uncle Ben was rescued by Kraft, and he was still saving Uncle Ben at the risk of an explosion. Peter, the guy who was in the wrong, had no position to accuse Kraft. Wanting to understand, Peter Parker weakly apologized to him and thanked him again. Sorry Kraft, thank you so much. However, Kraft didn't show him a good face. Instead, he turned to look at the black policeman and proactively promoted the XL Goblin pacemaker according to Angela's plan. In fact, if you police want it, there is no problem. Although there is a little danger, there is still a chance of saving people at critical moments. Kraft held out his thumb and forefinger and gestured. This thing can break 1 or 2 fingers at most, and get some slight burns. Wearing protective gloves or something when using it can easily solve this problem. Ahahaha. Forget this, the black policeman refused Kraft's sales promotion with a dry smile. We, the New York policemen, are usually tired, but most of them are in charge of trivial matters and life-threatening. It's not that much, probably because you won't be able to use your portable pacemaker. Really? It's up to you, Kraft shrugged, and said nonchalantly, you can contact me again when you need it. The police's refusal was actually calculated by Angela long ago. Even if they need first aid, it is impossible to use such explosive items. In case the public knows about it, the New York Police Department chief and relevant persons in charge will not be pleased. And those army or agent organizations hiding behind will not be short of a first aid method with fatal flaws. That's it. The black policeman covered the record book, took out a booklet from his pocket, and handed it in the pen in his hand to Kraft. Excuse me. Please sign it and write it down. For Hawk and Andy, if you can, it's better to add the phrase, you have a good father. With such a familiarity and a sense of precision, this policeman's black blood is very pure. With a concealed corner of his mouth, Kraft still wrote everything according to the words of the black policeman. Compared with most black fathers, the black man in front of him can become a policeman and remember the preferences of his children. Good father. But Kraft was still a bit surprised. He didn't even ask about the adrenaline. Maybe the hospital didn't discover the particularity of the adrenaline he had injected. It seems that the medical level of this hospital, or the technical level of the intelligence department behind it, is just average. When the black policeman left, Kraft raised his chin and looked at Peter Parker with a worried look. You are amazing now, you dare to fight black boxing. I must tell Aunt May and Uncle Ben, you wait to die. Don't Kraft. Peter Parker smiled at him flatteringly. You don't need to tell them about such trivial matters. Didn't I want to share the household for them? Who knew this kind of thing would happen? Huh. I heard that. You obviously have the ability to grab your salary directly, but you dare not do it yourself. Instead, let a robber vent your anger for you. You are so promising, Peter Parker. But then I am just like that robber. Peter weakly wanted to refute. To be honest, Kraft didn't pursue his deliberate release of the robber, which made him a little surprised, and secretly relieved. In contrast, Kraft was scolded by Kraft. Promising. Hey, isn't he used to this kind of thing a long time ago? Are you stupid? Kraft pointed to his nose and yelled. That's the money you earned yourself. How can it be the same? You were responsible for this lawsuit to the sky. Although Peter Parker felt that the underground black boxing profession would not be accepted by the court, he wisely did not talk back, but curled his neck like a quail and showed a grieved expression. Seeing Kraft's heart burst into flames. I don't care why you became so able to fight. Anyway, if you involve Uncle Ben or Aunt May again because of this kind of mess in the future, see how I teach you. Don't think you have a little ability, I just can't help you. Kraft turned on the cuff in front of Peter Parker, then slapped the table beside him in two. Have you heard clearly? Listen, hear clearly. Although in the eyes of Peter Parker, this level of strength is not a big deal, but he was still taken aback by Kraft's invention. In addition, he was indeed at a loss in this matter and fell to Kraft. There are too many handles in his hand, I can only honestly admit it. Anyway, this kind of thing is not the first time, just get used to it. Alexander Pierce pushed open the door of Nick Fury's office and walked in with a smile on his face. Oh, here you are. Nick Fury put down the documents in his hand, took out a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses from the wine cabinet on the side, and poured one to Alexander Pierce. Try the new wine I just got from France. Is S.H.I.E.L.D.'s funds used for this by you? Pierce glared at Fury pretendingly, then pulled the chair away and sat across from Fury, took a sip from the wine glass. It tastes good, wait a minute. I will take away 2 bottles. Putting down the wine glass, Pierce pretended to point to the documents on the table inadvertently, and asked, is S.H.I.E.L.D. insufficiently manpowered recently? You actually want you, the director, to handle the documents himself? Ha. This. Nick Fury shook his head and smiled, and threw the file to Pierce. This is the investigation report that I just got from the FBI. I think it's very interesting. Let's take a look and pass the time. Can I see? Pierce caught the file, but didn't open it in a hurry. Definitely, it's not important information. Nick Fury shrugged his shoulders and gestured at Pierce to please. Craftily? Pierce tapped his index finger on his forehead and recalled. The one that is the favorite of the mechanical warfare? Huh, the group of people in the Security Council really made his mind. From the point of Pierce's recollection, Nick Fury can figure out why he knew Kraft. Pierce also did not deny, as long as you know Nick, as long as it is something that can reduce military spending, it's impossible for those guys to be uninterested. As he said, he continued to flip through the documents in his hand. Let me see. What did this kid do? He was actually targeted by the FBI. Nick Fury didn't bother him anymore, while sipping the fine wine in the glass, while quietly waiting for the old boss to read the documents. This portable pacemaker is a bit interesting. Unfortunately, the defect is too big, and we don't lack such first aid methods. If it solves the explosion problem, it can be used as a standing first aid item for ordinary people. Closing the file in his hand, Alexander Pierce shook his head. Except for the Goblin Pacemaker XL, he couldn't even look at the Solar Skateboard. As early as when the Solar Skateboard series was released, these forces actually estimated that this thing should be able to increase their output. Even if Kraft's skateboarding performance exceeded their estimates, they were not equipped with similar or even better equipment. Number. The core value of skateboarding lies in the solar energy device, and the Solar Energy Company under Martin Lee has long established a lot of cooperation with the official, and there is no need to go to Kraft to engage in skateboarding technology. As for things like miniature bugs, their agent organizations are not lacking, so the equipment displayed by Kraft looks magical, but whether it is for S.H.I.E.L.D., Hydra, or agent organizations such as FBI, they are all tasteless chicken ribs, and it is not a pity to discard them. That's true, Nick Fury nodded in agreement, so the FBI didn't do anything about intelligence, and directly handed over this investigation report, because in their opinion, this little guy's invention did nothing to them. Usefulness. At this point, Nick Fury's face showed a mocking smile, and Alexander Pierce's face also had the same expression. The FB's business level is really getting worse. Pierce shook his head and sighed. Although these inventions are not very useful, this little guy. The potential is huge. The two said in unison, then looked at each other and smiled, and raised their wine glasses to touch each other for a tacit understanding. So you plan to absorb him into S.H.I.E.L.D.? Swallowing the red wine in his mouth, Pierce asked. I have this idea, but I'm not in a hurry, Nick Fury nodded, and replied somewhat helplessly. This little guy is not friendly to American officials and non-Asian people. Racism. Alexander Pierce raised his eyebrows. The reason he paid attention to Kraft was only because of his mechanical warfare, and he didn't understand the others. They Hydra had cooperated with a racist during World War E. That is not a beautiful thing. Experience. Not really. Nick Fury chuckled and shook his head, briefly mentioning the identities and experiences of Kraft and Martin Lee. It's not so much racial discrimination as it is because you discriminate me, so I also have to discriminate against your vengeance. Ha ha ha. Really childish thoughts. Pierce laughed twice and raised his glass to block the expression on his face. Maggie Gang? 8 years ago. Is it Straker? Although both are Hydra, Alexander Pierce and Baron Strucker are responsible for different content, so he just probably knows that Baron Strucker used gangsters to conduct large-scale human experiments many years ago. Nick Fury didn't know Pierce's psychological activities. He followed and laughed. He is still a child, so I don't plan to contact him prematurely. Well, that's all for small talk. Pierce nodded and agreed with Fury's idea. Before Kraft realized his potential, Hydra didn't need to rush to absorb him. It could wait for Nick Fury to take action before taking it in. About your Avengers plan, it was rejected by the Security Council. Putting down the wine glass in his hand, Alexander Pierce brought Nick Fury a reply from the Council. Most of them think that their own country's military can handle everything, and those freaks are originally unstable factors and cannot be controlled by others at all. I didn't intend to control them. Nick Fury rolled his one eye. That's what I said to the Security Council. Pierce shrugged, her mouth narrowed with a helpless expression, but they don't like the appearance of another team that is not under their control. Your shield is enough for them to have a headache. At this point, Pierce laughed gleefully. So I think you will not obediently abandon your Avengers plan according to the Council's intentions? Definitely. Nick Fury put his arms around his chest, leaned back, and put on a rascal look. As long as I conceal them from forming the Avengers, what can they do if they object? You won't say anything, right? Have you forgotten? Nick. Alexander Pierce raised his glass and touched Nick Fury again. We are all together. Definitely. Nick Fury drank the wine in his glass, and pulled out a somewhat horrified smile. Old man. As Angela analyzed, although the techniques exposed by Kraft attracted the attention of America's intelligence agencies, they did not bother him. On the contrary, many customers of Dreamland Toys Company knew in the news that solar skateboards could speed up, and they ran to the company's official website and the Chow Show channel to make him launch a high-speed version of solar skateboards. Although the original solar skateboard cannot be copied by others, it is not difficult to design a high-speed skateboard that can be mass-produced with Kraft's current technology, but the cost is higher. After some discussions in the planning department, operation department and legal department, the company finally passed the high-speed skateboarding project and prepared a long exemption statement to minimize the risk. So not long after, in the streets and alleys of New York, Kraft could see people on skateboards, balance bikes, and even wheelchairs competing with cars and motorcycles. There were even people holding competitions, and the media was also because of this. After eating a wave of bonuses, just like the birth of a mechanical warfare, everyone is very happy. Except for the New York Police and Transportation Department. George Stacy sighed deeply, the chief of the New York Police Department who stayed to work overtime again today. Originally there was a Hell's Kitchen in New York, which made it difficult for the New York Police to deal with. In recent years, with the emergence of the Hulk and Iron Man, as well as the gradual improvement of information technology, those special groups of people who have been hidden have been a little bit unaware. At this time, a dream toy company ran out to make them messy. I hate genius. George Stacy threw the report aside and patted the desk fiercely. How could their police force be wasted in such a boring place? Reject me applications for these damn skateboarding competitions. We don't have the staff to guard their boring competitions. If you want security, you can spend your own money to protect the company. The secretary yelled at his assistant. I see.
The assistant brother helped the gold wire glasses on the bridge of his nose and curled his neck to remind. But those traffic accidents caused by solar skateboards still need our people to come forward.
Oh. George Stacy squeezed the bridge of his nose and waved weakly. Let Bill and his team get some people to deal with it. Let's put the problem in Hell's Kitchen first. Anyway, we will also take the ones over there. The gang has nothing to do. Although the aspiring George Stacy wanted to use the entire New York police force to solve the problem of Hell's Kitchen, he also knew that with the current strength of the New York police, it was impossible to do so. Instead of doing this, let himself first of all, his subordinates will deal with the relatively safe traffic problem. Just when the chief of the New York Police Department was very busy, a righteous policeman with a mask turned out to radiate outwards from the Queens area, solving many problems for their police. A superhero again? George Stacy looked at the report handed over by his men with a complex expression. He was actually very grateful to be able to mention that the police shared the pressure, but the existence of these superheroes also brought out the incompetence of their police. Moreover, there are several similar existences in Hell's Kitchen. Director George has also dealt with them. Although they are generally kind, they all have their own principles and will not completely abide by the law. Set, especially the guy called the Punisher, is even more cruel than the gang in Hell's Kitchen. If it hadn't been for someone on him to call Roar, Director George would have issued him a wanted order. However, the latest boy who appeared is quite to his own appetite. He does not just fight against some underground forces like other superhero, or go around solving war problems like Tony Stark's Playboy, but does not care about the problem file size, will help solve it, as he himself said, is a good neighbor of New Yorkers. If you can, try to get in touch with this Spider-Man, establish contact with him and hand over some more urgent issues to him. George Stacy is not an old-fashioned person either. After thinking about it, he decided to pull Spider-Man into their New York police camp. Peter Parker has been very successful recently. Since acquiring the spider ability, he has not only become boyfriends with Mary Jane, but also secretly transformed into Spider-Man to fight crime. Because of his down-to-earth course of action, quickly he established a reputation in the big city of New York, and even the police began to take the initiative to look for him to cooperate. This makes Peter Parker feel that his life has reached the peak, and he feels a little fluttering. The only question is, how much does Kraft know about himself? Peter Parker thought at this time that Kraft really put a bug under his shoes to save Uncle Ben in time, so until now, every time he turns into a Spider-Man to go out, he will check it carefully. Is there any problem with him? I even made a special detector to detect bugs and the like. However, since he has been active in New York for so long as a Spider-Man, Kraft hasn't come to the door to see. He should know not much, otherwise he would have come to the door to threaten him with the level of that bear kid as a bastard. Compared to the Daily Horn that frantically vilified Spider-Man from the beginning, Kraft is Peter Parker's lifelong enemy. At any rate, the Horn Daily was very generous when buying Spider-Man photos, and solved a lot of financial problems for Peter, otherwise he would not have so much money to date Mary Jane. Peter Parker's worries are purely unnecessary, because his identity has long been stripped away by Angela. Not only did Kraft know that he was a Spider-Man, he even had some embarrassment when he first started as a superhero, but also with the early uniforms of the Spicy Eyes, Kraft kept all the backups. It's just unnecessary to not trouble him now. For Kraft, isn't it something that can be done casually if you want to know Peter? It's not a big deal at all. Brother, there is a letter from you. When Kraft returned home, Alice handed him a dark blue envelope with a golden pattern on it, which looked very high. Is there anyone writing letters these days? Kraft reached out and took the envelope, and it felt stubborn, not like a letter, but like some kind of card. Turn the envelope over, and a large Stark Industry logo is printed on the seal. Stark? Kraft raised his eyebrows, opened the envelope, and took out an invitation with the same high level. The content of the invitation is very simple. It is to invite Kraft to participate in the Stark Expo 3 months later, but at the bottom of the invitation, a cartoon image that looks like a mouse and a dog is drawn. Kraft didn't know if Stark had guessed his identity, or if he was just a test. But no matter what, he was hung up on Stark's side. Angela, what do you think? With Uncle Ben's experience, Kraft still approves of Angela's analysis ability. The known information is too little to analyze. Angela quickly replied, but according to Tony Stark's character analysis, if he has doubts about you, how can you deny that he will not believe it, unless he finds it again? Other evidence. Tisk. Trouble. This guy is really a big problem. Kraft scratched his head irritably. Knowing that he would be guessed so easily, he stopped going to fight Tony Stark at that time. By the way, isn't Stark Industries now undergoing transformation? And America is forced to hand over the steel battlesuit. Why is there still time for an expo? This is why Kraft has never wanted to reveal his identity. Even Tony Stark's patriotic businessman, who was offered as a bodhisattva by the American authorities, could not escape the fate of being exploited, let alone his underage Chinese kid. Young. The expo can better promote the Stark Industries arc reactor, which is actually helpful to the Stark industry that is undergoing transformation. In addition, the prestige is high enough to make America official have some scruples. Angela briefly explained the meaning of the Stark Expo, and then showed a slightly confused expression. However, the management of Stark Industries seems to be a bit chaotic recently, and many business behaviors seem strange, and Tony Stark is still interviewing CEOs on a large scale, seeming to want to hand over management rights. Probably he became addicted to superhero? Don't want to waste time on these boring jobs? For this, Kraft understands Tony Stark quite well, because he doesn't like managing companies or anything, so it's more fun to spend time in the laboratory. Do you think I should go to this fair? Angela? The management of Stark Industries was nothing to do with Kraft, so he brought the topic back again. From the perspective of company development, participating in the expo is good for you, and whether you participate or not, it will not shake Tony Stark's suspicion, but from a personal point of view, I think you may not like to participate. This kind of activity. That's right. Kraft snapped his fingers and pointed at Angela. You have been able to correctly distinguish the preferences of others. Do you really need me to make you a body or something? No, it makes me feel more at ease in the internet. Angela once again rejected Kraft's kindness. I am different from Alice, and I don't have the idea of becoming a human being. I prefer to call Roar myself an information life. Body. Kraft's expression stagnated. Wouldn't he cause an omnic crisis? Your expression is a little ugly. Are you worried about me? Angela's phantom glanced at Kraft and asked calmly. Yes, you should have seen some sci-fi works about the omnic crisis on the internet, right? Kraft hesitated for a moment, then nodded and said. You can rest assured that my core logic is to take orders from you. If you are really worried, I can destroy myself. This is unnecessary. Kraft waved his hand again and again, not because he believed in Angela or something, but he felt that even if Angela had a problem, he would be able to solve it by the unscientific methods in his dream. In contrast, this kind of nonsense knowing whether the crisis will happen is more difficult for him to accept than losing Angela's support. Angela, who was stopped by Kraft, didn't have any special reaction, just nodded calmly, as if she was not the one who said that she was going to self-destruct. Message from Tony Stark. After awkwardly silent for a while, Angela suddenly spoke, and lit the screen in front of Kraft, displaying a line of text. Have you received the invitation? So direct? Kraft scratched his head, thinking of Angela's analysis of Tony Stark and his own understanding of him, feeling that even if he denies it, it's useless, and he's walking all day long. In fact, Kraft also wants to find someone to show off. Just a moment. So Kraft confessed it bluntly, and quickly typed on the keyboard, I got it. It really is this kid. Tony Stark on the other side of the screen slapped him, then replied, you will come, right? Go if you have something delicious. No problem. I will definitely entertain you well when the time comes, and we can have a good drink. Stark and Kraft are communicating with each other on the internet. Oh yes, I forgot you were underage. Through the computer screen, Kraft could imagine Stark's face when he uttered these words. Kraft didn't mean to quarrel with him, and directly posted a video of Bo Taijun beating Mark, using people to threaten others or something. He was so proficient in this matter. Damn. When did he make the video? That invisible flight device. Tony Stark on the other side of the network hugged his head. How could he allow such a shameful video to exist in this world? Say it. What? How much do I need to pay for you to delete this video? You can make a price. Kraft asked Angela to help bring up a video, from which a short cut was posted. This is an interview that Tony Stark once accepted. In the video, he wears a suit and leather shoes and wears a pair of big sunglasses. He eloquently said a famous saying, I will be short of this money? Damn it. Tony Stark hit the table with a punch. This kid is not cute at all. If you paint your skin yellow, maybe he will be kinder to you, sir. Jarvis suddenly said. This joke is not funny at all, Jarvis. But, my humorous logic was written by you, sir. Tony Stark. I had to deal with Kraft while arguing with my own artificial intelligence. It's really hard for me. Let's compare again. If I win this time, you will delete that video. After several upgrades, Stark is full of confidence in his Mark series battlesuit. However, Kraft didn't accept this. Under the premise that there was already a violent Stark video, it didn't make much sense to win again. He would delete the video if he lost. He wouldn't do this kind of trade at a loss. Does bullying a child make you feel fulfilled like that, Mr. Iron Man? This kid is really annoying. Tony Stark, who always stabbed others into speechlessness, was stunned by Kraft. And Kraft doesn't know why. When he uses the keyboard to talk to people, his thoughts are particularly active. I already regret inviting him. Should I remove Kraft Lee from the invitation list? Jarvis, who has no price for eyesight, asked. No. I'm not a backer. Yes, your integrity is obvious to all in the media industry. Hearing Jarvis's humorous response, Stark regretted for the first time the humor logic he had written for him at the time. In the end, Tony Stark still failed to convince Kraft to delete the dark history about him. However, his original purpose of contacting Kraft was, besides confirming his identity, another reason was that he hoped that Kraft would come up with something new at the Stark Expo. It is best to be a mechanical pet from the Iron Man series. By the way, create a unique and exclusive pet for him. Kraft decisively rejected Stark's request, and did not give a definite reply, because he couldn't think of any new things he could bring out to participate in the exhibition for a while. There is definitely a good thing, but he doesn't want to sell it to America. It's still more in line with Kraft's thoughts that it can make people play things like mechanical battle pets and high-speed skateboards, or add a little mess to America. However, the Stark Expo started early, so I don't worry about what to send to the exhibition. At this time, Kraft was basically making weapons, so he could take the opportunity to change something interesting for fun, and find the right props and take it to the exhibition. Looking through the dreams of those entertainment props, Kraft found that there were actually a lot of good things inside. For example, a toy called a four-wheel drive has one thing to say, and the technical content of this thing is quite high. However, there are already similar toys in the real world. Although they are not as exaggerated as the four-wheel drive in the dream, the overall gameplay is the same. It seemed to have been hot for a while, but now it is relatively unpopular, so Kraft will make it even higher. Level 4-wheel drive, it is estimated that it will not make much money. There are also some toys like Battletops, which are interesting, but in general the target group is young children with low technical content. It would be a bit of a shame to participate in the Stark Expo. For toys with relatively high technical content, such as the dual plate, it is not difficult for Kraft to come up with a card reading and projection system without the original magical power of that world, but except for the core of the game similar to Magic, how many people will spend a lot of money to buy a flashy thing just to play Magic with others? At most, you can make a few and sell them to Magic, so that they can use them when they host competitions. After looking around, Kraft could not find one that met his own requirements. There were many interesting things in the Dreamland, but it was either too expensive to be popularized, or too simple and without technical content, and was not suitable for exhibiting. Should I design one myself? Kraft stroked his chin, a little eager to try. Kraft's preliminary idea still wanted to make a Pokeball-like thing to store mechanical pets, but this would inevitably involve space compression technology, which Kraft definitely has, but how could he expose it? Let America know. So he changed his mind and designed the mechanical battle pet as a kind of gashapon. When needed, he can shapeshift from a small ball into a battle pet by himself. Such a product looks very high-end, but in fact it is not too high. The technical content is very in line with Kraft's requirements. That's a good idea. Kraft patted his thigh. Angela, bring me the design drawings of the mass-produced mechanical young dragon. The points of light converged, and a virtual blueprint appeared in front of Kraft. Kraft stretched out his hand and swiped on this virtual drawing, changing the design on the drawing, from time to time between 2D and 3D. Switch back and forth from time to time. With Angela's assistance, it's not difficult to change the ordinary mechanical pet drawings into the gashapon version. It was just one night that Kraft completed the design drawings of the mechanical young dragon and the mechanical tiger. As for other mechanical pets, it can be designed slowly in the future. After the design was completed, Kraft made an entity by himself. Because of the hand-rubbing skills of engineering, this mechanical young dragon is an enhanced version. However, the combat effectiveness of the mechanical young dragon does not affect Kraft's test of its shapeshifting ability. He reached out and pressed his hand under the mechanical young dragon's neck, and it quickly curled up and turned into a sphere with a diameter of about 15 centimeters. It seems a bit bigger. Kraft scratched his head. This Pokeball was much bigger than he thought, but this was already the limit. If you want to shrink, you can only shrink the size of the mechanical young dragon at the same time. But this is not a big problem. In addition to the original version of the mechanical pet, Dreamland Toys has later launched a smart version and a remote control version of the mechanical pet. There is also a large version displayed in the company, so we will launch it now. A portable version is not a problem. After fixing the products used for the exhibition in 3 months, the sky has completely darkened. Because I had called Alice before and told her that I would not go back at night, Kraft slept directly here in the laboratory. Down. I don't know if it was because of a conversation with Angela that Kraft had 2 consecutive dreams related to the Omnic crisis this evening. One is called Skynet, which has produced a large number of robots, killing humans almost to extinction. The other is called the maternal body. It did not choose to exterminate humans, but instead, planted humans in the life-sustaining cabin as if they were crops. Kraft, who sat up on the bed, touched the cold sweat on his forehead and hesitation for a long time. Angela. I am here. Angela's phantom appeared beside Kraft's bed. I want to take back your control of all weapons, sorry. Kraft pursed his lips, and explained to her, I just had a nightmare about an Omnic crisis. This is the right you gave me, there is no need to be sorry. Angela had no opinion on this, and she gave Kraft advice. With my ability, some armed forces in the base can be invaded at any time to regain control, so you'd better remove the wireless intrusion device on my mainframe. The wireless intrusion device was the technology that Kraft learned from the wrench. He installed it directly on Angela's host for the convenience of testing. If it weren't for her reminder, Kraft would have forgotten it. Ah, I see. I'll go later. Kraft is not hypocritical, although I feel a little sorry for Angela, but he still needs insurance. Any other things? If it's okay, I will continue to talk to Jarvis. It's okay. Kraft scratched his head and watched Angela's phantom gradually disappear. He couldn't help asking again. Do you really need me to make you a body? I will tell you when I need it. You don't need to feel guilty, Kraft. Angela's figure gathered again and smiled at him. I'm very satisfied with my current state, father. Wait. What the hell is father? Kraft jumped up from the bed, and Angela let out a burst of crisp laughter, which turned into a light spot and disappeared. At Kraft's insistence, Angela finally changed her mind and began to call Roar Kraft her brother like Alice. Should I be a brother or sister next time? Kraft touched his head, put all his thoughts aside, stepped on the skateboard and went back to have breakfast prepared by Alice. Brother, it's the weekend again, let's go to the feast shelter to help. While having breakfast, Alice suddenly proposed. Cough. Cough cough. At the moment Kraft, who was drinking porridge, flicked his wrist and choked. After taking the paper towel from Alice and wiping his mouth, Kraft made a regretful look. I received the invitation letter from the Stark Expo yesterday, and I am busy designing exhibits to participate in the exhibition. I really don't have time. Really? All right. The invitation for the Stark Expo was given to Kraft by Alice, so she was easily fooled by Kraft. Then I have to take Quinn. Surprised. Quinn, who buried his head in the food bowl, raised his head and stared wide. Is this reasonable? I'm just a dog. Why do you do this to me? However, no matter how hard it struggled, it was eventually dragged away by Alice, who was particularly strong in this regard. Fortunately, I am a cat. Beja watched Quinn being dragged away by Alice and flicked her tail gloating. Actually, if you arrange it, you can also help. Kraft said quietly from the side. Meow. Beja arched her body, stubbornly blasted her hair at Kraft. I'm scratching you. The armed forces in the Congo anyway were defeated by a mysterious figure wearing a black armor. Wakanda's press spokesperson stated that they were responsible for the incident. The mysterious figure was Wakanda's Crown Prince T'Challa, who had just inherited in the name of Black Panther. I decided to make a contribution to the peace issue in Africa. Originally wanted to continue molesting Beja, Kraft was caught by the news on TV. After reporting the incident in Congo, the TV briefly introduced Wakanda's customs and the concept of the so-called Black Panther. Because Wakanda has given enough benefits before, most of the reports on them are now positive. The so-called experts in the news also praised T'Challa's behavior. Obviously, two of them said on a show a few days ago that superhero like Iron Man is the source of chaos. However, most of the media have always been virtuous, talking and farting, and Kraft did not care about their position.
In contrast, Wakanda's crown prince ran out to become a superhero himself, and Kraft was even more interested in this matter.
Obviously, because of their own operations, Wakanda's reputation in the world has been severely affected. It doesn't matter if they are shut down as before, but now they have been forced to communicate with the outside world, so the reputation cannot be ignored. Recovered. In fact, before this, Wakanda has done a lot of efforts for this, such as conducting free clinics in various places, participating in various rescue and disaster relief, but with little effect, because such things are not only done by them, even if the ability to solve the problem is much higher than that of others, and it will not appear to be much novel in news reports. Until the appearance of Iron Man Tony Stark, the Wakanda royal family found that superhero is a very easy job to gain prestige, and they happen to have a set of Black Panther armor. At the moment, the aging king of Wakanda T'Chaka arranged for his son T'Challa to carry out the Black Panther in advance. Trial. When T'Challa was studying in Oxford before, he thought about getting Wakanda into the outside world more than once. Later, he suffered campus violence because of Kraft's troubles. Not only did he not bear his hatred for exposing Wakanda's High Tide organization, instead, I feel more and more that my idea is right. So when T'Chaka asked if he wanted to inherit the power of Black Panther, T'Challa accepted it without hesitation, and passed the trial of the heart-shaped grass very smoothly, and became a player under the name of Black Panther. A superhero active in Africa. I don't know which suit of his armor is better than Stark's. Kraft touched his chin, and made up his mind that he must find a chance to encourage the two to do a fight. With Tony Stark's annoying character, it should be easy to succeed. When the bad water was in Kraft's heart, he suddenly felt a little itchy in his arms. He looked down and saw that the little black cat Bea was rubbing his arm with her small head, with a pair of big eyes. Blingboo, Ling, looked at himself. What's the matter, Beja? Kraft hugged her, held her in his arms, and lifted it up. This little guy is usually relatively cold and easily untouched, that is to say, Alice is an exception. Now, if she is willing to come up, she must be seeking herself. That cat. Beja pointed to the Black Panther who was playing on the TV. That dress is so beautiful. I want a set of cats too. Okay. Black Cat and Black Panther are indeed very similar. Kraft thought about it, and indeed should prepare Beja and Quinn a little self-defense. After all, apart from being able to talk, they are just like ordinary cats. There is no difference between dogs. Alright. Kraft turned off the TV, and walked out holding Beja. We will go to the laboratory and give you a complete set of equipment. But if you say in advance, you are not allowed to use them for sabotage, otherwise I will confiscate it. Good meow. Beja happily nudged Kraft again, and agreed. There is no cat armor in Kraft's dreams, but this thing has always been Belden. It is not too difficult to change the human armor to cat and dog. So, which type do you prefer, Beja? Kraft called up two types of armor on the computer. One is a close-fitting armor similar to the Black Panther armor in the steel battlesuit, and the other is thicker in shape and reduces flexibility. In exchange for heavy armor with stronger firepower. Definitely is this kind of cat. Beja pointed to the beautifully lined close-fitting armor on the left. As a cat, she didn't like that cumbersome shape. I think so. Clough nodded his head, and began to design her armor for Beja. Just like cats usually like to retract their paws, the battle armor designed by Kraft for Beja looks like a smooth black metal coat. All the weapons are hidden in the armor using nanotechnology and space compression technology. Inside, using the same technology, the entire armor was fitted into a small collar, and an auxiliary eye was installed in the armor to help Beja control the armor. Put the collar on Beja. Because the neck is a collar and a scarf, the little black cat felt a little uncomfortable. Kraft helped her adjust for a long time, and the cat owner was barely satisfied. Try it. Meow. Beja stretched out her front paws and squeezed on the collar, and the black armor quickly covered her whole body, and a pair of golden lenses on her face glowed with a faint light. This suit, named Timal, uses a scale design similar to pangolin's, making the overall lines look very smooth. As for the name, it was the same as before, because of the inexplicable sense of sight, plus it was quite appropriate, and Kraft had no idea of changing it. The little black cat looked up and down in the mirror for a long time, and was also very satisfied with the suit. After retracting it, he jumped into Kraft's arms and kept rubbing. Let Kraft suck. In the evening, Kraft took Beja back home. Unsurprisingly, Beja caught her new armor in front of Quinn for the first time. And Quinn did not unexpectedly ran to him crying. Big brother, you are partial. Before Kraft could explain to him, the stupid dog hugged his thigh and began to cry. I want this kind of transformable toy too. Cats think this is beautiful clothes, dogs think this is an interesting toy. Well, nothing wrong. Stop howling. I didn't say no to you. Kraft grabbed Quinn's head and pushed him aside. Aren't you here today? What if you don't like the armor you designed? When tomorrow you go to the laboratory with me, we will design a set for you together. How is it possible? As long as my eldest brother gives it to me, I like it. Hearing Kraft's explanation, Quinn opened his eyes and smiled, flicking his tail and standing up, rushing into Kraft's arms to lick his face. Then I just design it casually, Kraft said quietly while resisting Quinn's enthusiasm. Quinn's movements were stopped, and he quickly asked for help. Definitely, it would be better if Big Brother can listen to my opinion a little bit. Your cheek is getting thicker. Kraft tugged at the flesh on both sides of Quinn's cheeks and smiled helplessly. After pacifying Quinn, he finally became less noisy. Beja wanted to continue to tease him twice, but Kraft was ruthlessly suppressed. After watching the soap opera with Alice for a while, the time gradually reached around 10 o'clock, and Kraft and Alice, who had accurate biological clocks, yawned at the same time. Good night, brother. Alice rubbed her eyes and turned off the TV to go to sleep. And Kraft once again emphasized to Beja that he should not slip out in his armor while he was sleeping, and he was also going to wash up and go back to the room to sleep, but the bone conduction earphones attached to his ears heard Angela's information. Brother, Spider-Man and Uncle Martin are up to each other. What? Kraft, who was still a little sleepy, woke up instantly. Yes, Peter Parker has become addicted to being a superhero recently. It is not unusual for him to go to the devil for trouble, he should have considered it a long time ago. Kraft patted his forehead with some annoyance, then grabbed his shoulder bag and ran out. You stay at home obediently and don't run around. I hurriedly confessed to Alice and the two pets. Kraft stepped on the skateboard and hurried to Martin Lee. The nano earphones behind his ears turned into a pair of glasses with a sense of science and technology. A virtual arrow on the lens shows him the way. Tonight, New Yorker's good neighbor, the new superhero, Spider-Man Peter Parker, is fighting crime as usual. Peter, who recently got in touch with the New York police, spends most of his time dealing with urgent cases that they cannot handle, but sometimes Peter Parker will act alone to maintain law and order near the Queens area where he lives and prevent recurrence. It happened like my uncle last time. After Spider-Man's hard work, the law and order in Queens is now quite peaceful. In recent years, in the Flushing area of Queens, overseas immigrants have gradually increased. The Chinese power here has already surpassed Manhattan's Chinatown. As the master of the Chinese underground power in New York, Mr. Film will naturally not let this land go. As early as a few years ago, Martin Lee had begun to gradually integrate the Chinese forces in the Flushing area. It was only because of the need to distract the Majian gang and other Asian forces competing for territory with him. It has not been won. But in the past 2 years, due to Kraft's invention, Martin Lee's family was suddenly strong, and other gangs in the Flushing area could no longer stop the invasion of the Demon Gang. However, it was at this time that Peter Parker, a Spider-Man, discovered the actions of the Demon Gang. He had already disrupted the actions of the Devil Gang several times before, so this time Martin Lee personally led the team and wanted to do it all at once. Get rid of that annoying Spider-Man and eat the Flushing area completely. Hey! Are you there, boss? Peter Parker, who is incarnate as Spider-Man, does not know why he has a special desire to confide in the face of evil forces. He can't stop at all. Bring cool the dazzling mask to hide the identity should be the patent of a superhero. Spider-Man squatting on the street lamp taunted. The stockings and black mask are the right tools for you criminals to mask your face. Mr. Negative was frustrated by the Spider-Man's chanting, and directly condensed a negative energy spear and threw it at him. Wow. Interrupting others is bad behavior. Spider-Man turned over and jumped off the street light, then squeezed the web shooters on his wrist and shot a cobweb at the mask on the film's face. Let me see what kind of face I have under the mask. The film raised his hand to block the cobweb, and then let Spider-Man pull himself over. His negative energy is not very useful to the vicious criminals, but to deal with this kind of superhero with a sense of justice, it is one hit and one accurate. What Knight Moxia and Shenlixia, all have sunk sand and halberd under the erosion of his negative energy. Ha! I caught you. Spider-Man clasped the film's wrist, trying to subdue him. No, I caught you. The negative grabbed Spider-Man backhand, and the negative energy poured into Spider-Man's body along his palm, eroding his spirit. Crazy thoughts filled Peter Parker's mind. He let go of the film's wrist, hugged his head and wailed loudly. Superhero. But so. A long sword of negative energy was condensed in his hand, and the film raised his hand and pierced the Spider-Man who was kneeling on the ground. Although Spider-Man's thinking was in chaos due to the negative energy, spider telepathy continued to work. Perceiving his own crisis, Peter Parker resisted the discomfort in his head and rushed to the side. The punctured film didn't care, and continued to swing the negative energy sword towards Spider-Man, but Spider-Man was indeed blessed with dexterity. Although it was dangerous, he still managed to get through under the film's hands. Roar. 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 After being in contact with the negatives, Spider-Man persisted until the negative energy in his body was exhausted. He panted heavily, looking at the negatives holding the black long sword not far away with a look of fear. It seems that you must keep a distance from him. Peter Parker quickly changed the battle plan. He shook his arms quickly, firing cobwebs with his hands rotating, trying to trap the film directly with cobweb. Then these cobwebs were torn to pieces by a negative energy half a month from the negative. Is it still possible to attack from a distance? This is too ridiculous. Sideways avoiding the half-moon cut of the negatives, Spider-Man had a headache. He was restrained in close combat and could not be beaten in long-range combat. This filmmaker was even more difficult to deal with than the stupid rhino in Hell's Kitchen. There is no way that he can only fight dangerously. The power and speed of the negatives are not as good as his own. As long as he is not caught, he can still fight in close combat. The determined Spider-Man dashed towards the film, twisting and avoiding the long sword in his hand several times in a row that ordinary people couldn't do, and punch him on the mask. Following the contact with the negatives, a trace of negative energy invaded Spider-Man's spirit again, but this time he left and retracted his hand after he finished playing, so although it was a bit uncomfortable, he could still hold on. Very good. Effective. Shaking his head to suppress the discomfort, Spider-Man was finally relieved when he saw the dawn of victory. The film was beaten back by Spider-Man by 2 steps, and he shook his head and straightened up again. Since the last time he was attacked by a rhino, he has been used to covering himself with a layer of negative energy defense, so Spider-Man's, although the punches were heavy, they didn't cause much damage to him. It's just that the negative energy mask on his face was only used to hide his appearance, and didn't have much defense power. It collapsed directly under this punch, revealing the dark face under the mask. Uncle Martin. Seeing the familiar face exposed under the mask, Peter Parker felt a stormy sea. He really didn't expect this gentle philanthropist to be a cruel gang leader behind his back. Do not. Wrong. Uncle Martin's current state is obviously wrong. Peter Parker's intelligence is not low, and he quickly noticed the difference between Mr. Negatives and Martin Lee, but no matter what the unspeakable concealment of Martin Lee, he must first subdue the negatives. I must bring Uncle Martin back to the right path. The Spider-Man, who had reconfirmed his faith, stepped up again and punched the film. Although the power and speed of the negatives are not as good as Spider-Man, they are much better than him in fighting skills, so the two actually fought back and forth for a while. Just as the two were entangled, Peter Parker's spider telepathy suddenly reminded him to avoid him frantically. Peter didn't think much, and quickly stopped his attack, then leaned back quickly and used an iron plate. Bridge. A brown shadow flew over Peter Parker with huge amounts of roar, and hit the wall beside him severely. Peter Parker looked intently, and the pool of brown colloid that fell on the corner of the wall should have been a leaky football. This scene seems a bit familiar. Peter Parker muttered to himself, then turned his head to look in the direction of the football. The cold sweat immediately soaked Spider-Man's back. What appeared in front of him was Peter Parker's greatest natural enemy in his life, Dr. Clever, Kraft Lee. Wrong. I am not Peter Parker now. I am now a Spider-Man. Why are you afraid of this bear kid? After touching his cheek subconsciously and touching his face mask, Peter Parker came back to his senses and kept cheering on himself. Martin, I didn't know that you have African ancestry. After losing the rugby, Kraft ignored Peter Parker, who was doing psychological construction for himself. Instead, he looked up and down Martin Lee with the anti-color filter, and joked with a grin. Seeing Martin Lee's current state, Kraft understood why he was called Mr. Negative. Why did you come here? The dark-faced Martin Lee frowned, changed his usual gentleness, and coldly reprimanded. Get me home. The things here are not something you can mix with. What's wrong with you? Kraft's eyes widened, and then quickly recalled what he had been in that country before, and now it was renamed S.H.I.E.L.D. The information he saw there was suspected to have a double personality. So, this is the price for your strength. Kraft frowned. There are 2 examples of Hulk and hatred. Martin changed his personality due to the human experiment of the Magia Gang. It is not unacceptable. At least he still maintains a human form and can communicate, compared to that. The 2 guys who turned into monsters are much better. I said. Go home. Martin Lee, who was in the state of Mr. Negatives, was not a good temper. Seeing Kraft's unwillingness to obey, he became a little impatient, condensing a negative energy in his hand and hitting Kraft's feet. Hey. Domestic violence is not a commendable act. Spider-Man turned over and stood in front of Kraft, then turned his head slightly and waved his hand. Your father is right. This is not the place for children like you to stay. Brother Spider-Man will solve your father's problems. Go home quickly, brother. Which little brother are you calling? Kraft folded his arms and looked at Peter Parker, who took advantage of him with his eyes slanted. Don't think I don't recognize you with layers of ridiculous tights. What Peter? Did you admit the wrong person? Peter Parker panicked instantly, stammering in denial. You come out to play a superhero playing game, don't you know how to change your voice? Kraft took out the onomatopoeic horn used to molest Peter and asked in the same voice as Spider-Man. It's not a game. Seeing that he couldn't hide it, Peter Parker had no choice but to admit it. Kraft really is his natural enemy. Nemesis. Peter? It's you. Martin Lee frowned. The fight seemed to be unstoppable. He slowly calmed down the negative energy in his body, gradually returning to his normal appearance. I didn't even think that Mr. Film will be Uncle Martin you. Spider-Man took off his headgear, revealing Peter Parker's somewhat immature face. Can you speak normally now? Kraft walked up to Martin Lee and touched the suit that turned back to black on him. Even the color of the clothes has been changed. Your power is quite amazing. What right do you have to say to me like this? Martin Lee rubbed Kraft's head angrily. Why did you come here? Kraft shrugged. I made Harrow and Angela pay attention to you and Aunt May and the others. Otherwise you really thought that the last time I saved my uncle was because I put a bug in Peter's place. I haven't, to the point of being boring. What? Is that fake? Peter Parker exclaimed. Why on earth he had been suspicious for so long before. Kraft really is a natural enemy. Natural enemy. Find a place to have a good chat. Martin Lee sighed. At this moment, this situation must be resolved by exposing it. Under Martin's leadership, the three came to the Demon Gang's station in Flushing, found a separate room and sat down. Why are you a criminal? Uncle Martin. As soon as he sat down, Peter Parker, who was full of justice, couldn't help but question. You and Kraft shouldn't be short of money, right? You don't need to use illegal means to get money. Because of the Magia Gang. Kraft replied for Martin Lee. 8 years ago, Martin and I were both guinea pigs captured by Magia for human trials. Human test. Peter Parker was taken aback, then persuaded. Then you can also choose to call the police. The police will definitely be able to bring them to justice. Do you believe this? Kraft rolled his eyes. Hell's Kitchen has existed for so long. Have you ever heard that the more famous gangster was wiped out by the New York police? And I didn't establish the Demon Gang purely because of the Magian Gang. Martin Lee sighed and explained. Although the Magia Gang's experiment has given me strength, you have also seen that he will make my character very irritable and cold, and I must vent it every now and then. Take a look at the negative emotions accumulated in my body, and the scumbags of the gangsters are my best vent. This. Is there no other solution? Peter Parker still wanted to dissuade him. Martin Lee shook his head. I will not consider this kind of thing until the Magia Gang is resolved. Even if the Magia Gang is resolved, I am not going to disband the Demon Gang. Why? Peter Parker asked a little excitedly. Originally, he still wanted to help Martin and Kraft solve the Magia Gang, so that Martin would stop being a gangster. Because of the existence of the Devil Gang, it can shelter a large number of Chinese, even other Asians. Martin Lee chuckled lightly, a trace of sarcasm on his face. If there were no demon gangs I built to shelter Chinatown, it would have been swallowed up by the gangs in Hell's Kitchen, and the Asians living in it would definitely be worse than the blacks in Hell's Kitchen. That's why Flushing's Chinatown was also brought under control. This, no matter how much Peter Parker believes in justice, he can't ignore America's racial issues. In the end, the Spider-Man who failed to persuade Martin Lee, left the Demon Gang's station full of heart. So, what's the truth? After Peter Parker left, Kraft raised Erlang's legs and leaned against the sofa, his eyes fixed on Martin Lee. I'm not the idiot Peter, and that claim of sheltering compatriots can't deceive me. Kraft believes that Martin has the mind to protect his compatriots and even Asians, but that is definitely not the main reason, because the boss of the Devil Gang is not Martin Lee, but Mr. Negatives. According to Martin's previous statement, when he became Mr. Negatives at that time, the whole person's temperament is cold and cruel, and there is definitely no idea of protecting others. Remember when we talked about returning to China before? Martin was silent for a while before asking suddenly. Which time did you say? Kraft always wanted to go back, and talked about related topics not once or twice. It was after seeing the Hulk news last time, Martin prompted, we talked about special humans. Oh, yes, there is such a thing. After being reminded, Clough nodded, so, it has something to do with the topic at the time? Yes, I actually tried to go back as an investor before, but I was stopped by someone. Martin Lee showed a look of memories. There is an official force in China that specializes in managing special groups of people. Because my ability is not under control, they gave me two options. One is to be supervised by them after returning to China, and the other is to inject a special locator into the body. If I continue to stay in America, I usually don't need to do anything more. I just occasionally help pass news, receive people from over there and so on, and collect some cultural relics that have been strayed abroad. So you chose the second one? No wonder you are in the antiques business. Kraft nodded clearly. No, Martin Lee shook his head with a smile, I chose to do it. He raised his hand to touch his cheek and said with a wry smile, then he was beaten badly. I want to use my own power to fight against the state apparatus. Kraft rolled his eyes with glee. It deserves to be beaten. I gained magical power at that time, it was the time to expand. Martin Lee sighed. Who would have thought that there would be so many people with special abilities in this world? What is the name of the domestic organization? Kraft asked with some curiosity that he also allowed Angela and Harrow to invade the networks of other countries. At that time, the domestic network blockade was a bit harsh, and a lot of information could not be found. It was no longer a wall, it is the Great Wall of China. They call themselves the Magic Spear Club, or the Magic Spear Bureau. The expression on Martin's face was complicated. Did you know? They actually have a grandson monkey in their team. Huh. Kraft, who was still considering the relationship between the Domestic Spear Bureau and America's Shield, raised his ears. The grandson you mentioned is the grandson I know? Yes, that's it, Monkey King Chishan Great Sage Sun Wukong, but it's not the deity, it's said to be some human being who has acquired the Monkey King's inheritance. Martin Lee looks unbelievable even when he recalls it now. After all, the name Monkey King has special meaning to most Chinese. Although it is not as exaggerated as in myths and legends, he basically has all the necessary abilities. I was knocked over by his stick on the face. That's right. I have fought against the descendants of Monkey King, and put it in front of any Chinese or bragging capital. Not only did Kraft not comfort his adoptive father, but he looked envious. If he could, he also wanted to fight with the great sage. Actually, if it were you, the Spear Bureau would be happy to accept it. Martin Lee glared at Kraft and suddenly said, "You don't have uncontrollable ability like me, and you also have a variety of advanced technologies that even the Spear game can't ignore. If you join the Divine Spear Bureau, it shouldn't be difficult to see that Sun Wukong's heir. It's fine to join the Spear Bureau or something." Kraft shook his head. "I said before, our life is pretty good now. After I go back, I can do things even if I am not subject to official restrictions. You have to be restrained. There are not so many scruples in America. When we develop, no matter what the FBI or the CIA, we dare to reach out and chop off people with their claws." Martin Lee also knew that Kraft said this because he didn't want to leave him alone in America. He smiled and rubbed Kraft's head without saying much, because he understood Kraft's character and even more because of him. "I don't want to be separated from Kraft." "That's right." Kraft turned his head away from Martin Lee's palm, and asked another question. "If your ability makes you cold-blooded, why did you keep me behind? Do you think I didn't throw you away?" Martin Lee smiled and didn't mean to conceal Kraft. "I picked it up." Martin Lee scratched his hair and said with some emotion, "When I first got ability, in fact, good and evil were very distinct. During the day, it was Martin Lee who was like a saint, and at night it was Mr. Negative who was possessed by a devil. But at that time, you were young and you were always delirious. It was a burden to the negatives. How could he not throw you away?" Having said this, Martin Lee's eyes on Kraft suddenly became very gentle, and he couldn't help but get goosebumps. "Why are you looking at me with such numb eyes suddenly?" Kraft rubbed his arms and shivered abruptly. "After you were picked up by me several times in a row, the negatives even thought of killing you." Martin didn't care, and continued to say with a gentle look, "But whenever he wants to attack you, the evil thoughts and good thoughts in the body will start to fight, and the two will gradually become integrated in the process, giving me the ability to control the transformation to a certain extent. Without your existence, perhaps Martin Lee will always be Martin Lee, and the negatives will always be the negatives, and maybe one day Martin Lee will be completely replaced by the negatives. Our two violent negatives will attract America's official hunt was finally sent back to the test bench. So it's not an exaggeration to say that your presence saved me." Martin Lee said with a serious face. "Really? You are shy when you say that." Kraft touched the back of his head embarrassedly, but his heart was warm. "Big brother. Get up. Big brother. Get up." Early the next morning, Kraft was awakened by an excited dog. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw Quinn's stupid face lying on his pillow. Roar. Roar. Tongue stuck out. "Brother. It's time to go to the laboratory." The sleepy Kraft put the quilt on his head and got back into the quilt. Yesterday, it was to stop Martin from fighting with Peter, and to chat with Martin again. By the time he came back, it was already early in the morning, and he didn't sleep much. At this time, he was still sleepy. "I'll sleep for another hour." Then, before Quinn continued to howl, he added, "If you quarrel me to sleep, your armor will be gone." Oh. Quinn swallowed the voice decisively, turned his head and ran. "It's okay to confiscated the armor, I touched it." When he was a little boy, Kraft, who was still a little sleepy, struggled to get up from the bed, walked to the bathroom in a daze and began to wash, while Quinn followed his feet and kept urging, "Brother, hurry up. It's almost noon." Kraft, who was so annoyed by Quinn, hurriedly finished the breakfast prepared by Alice, and took Quinn, who had been waiting a long time ago, and Beja, who wanted to join in the fun, to his laboratory together. So what kind of armor do you like? In the laboratory, Kraft showed 2 design ideas for Quinn to choose as usual. The big one. I like the big one. Quinn chose the heavy armed armor without hesitation. Can. Clough nodded and began to design a battle armor for Quinn. Unlike Beige's light armor, many parts of the heavy armor cannot be assembled with nanomachines, so if you want to stuff it into a collar, you basically have to use space compression technology to fix it, but there are one problem is that it is not convenient to locate accurately when dressing. There are a few solutions now. Kraft gave the decision to the dog himself, and he said to him with his fingers. Wear you a vest with a locator, but in this case you have to wear it all the time. Once the vest is lost, you won't be able to wear the armor. The second is to tie a locator on your limbs and tail. This will be much lighter than wearing a vest. The disadvantage is that you can't change your body if it falls off. The third type is to inject the nanopositioner into your body so that there is no possibility of falling off. It is also the one I personally recommend most. It is a little uncomfortable during the injection. Kraft stretched out his thumb and index finger and gestured in front of Quinn. The last one, I put the nanopositioners into your collar together. When you summon the armor, they will crawl to all parts of your body first. The disadvantage is that it takes a long time to dress. After telling Quinn several plans, Kraft spread his hands. Well, you can choose. I think you are embarrassing me, big brother. Quinn squatted on the ground, tilting his head and shaking his ears. He couldn't even think about such a complicated issue. Or choose the one recommended by your eldest brother. Are you sure? This is an injection. When he took Quinn to get the vaccine before, the dog was howling, and after the injection, he lay on his side and sobbed for a long time. Finally, Alice coaxed him with a big bone. It's okay, isn't it just an injection? It's not that I haven't had a shot before. Quinn flicked his tail indifferently. Oh, that's the case. Kraft nodded clearly. So when you got the vaccine before, you were pretending to be. Quinn shook his happily tail slightly, stunned. Big brother, listen to my sophistry. Ah no, listen to my explanation. Stupid dog meow. B, who was lying on the side, sneered with his tail swinging. Okay, I didn't say anything. Kraft rubbed Quinn's dog's head, hugged him to the workbench, and secured him with a strap. Wong. Didn't I say, there will be a little bit of discomfort. This is to prevent you from moving. Kraft touched Quinn's head amiably. I always think you have bad intentions, big brother. You think too much. Kraft picked up the prepared nano-injection gun, attached it to the sole of Quinn's foot, and pulled the trigger. Rua. Brother, let me be prepared. Quinn, who was stabbed, subconsciously shrank his claws, but because of the straps, he didn't move much. Kraft didn't speak, and continued to shoot each of his 3 other paws, then turned the head of the gun, and shot him in the tail and in the back. Okay. Kraft put away the injection gun and touched Quinn's dog's head again. Next, just wait for me to make the armor. Then big brother, put me down first. Quinn shook his ears, always feeling something was wrong. Those few shots didn't hurt him much. Why should he tie himself so tightly? At the moment Kraft was already buried in another workbench, and did not reply to Quinn. But soon Quinn knew why. The nanomachines injected into his body began to walk around in his body, each looking for a suitable position for final fixation. It hurts but it doesn't hurt. Ha 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 ha. Itchy. Big brother goo goo me. Itchy me. Ha 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 ha. Because his body was completely fixed, Quinn couldn't tick himself at all, and could only tremble crazily on the workbench. To die to die to die. Just when Quinn was about to faint with a smile, those nanomachines finally reached the predetermined position, and then stretched out a few tiny claws to fix themselves on Quinn's bones. The pain when the nanomachine was embedded in the bone caused Quinn's body to twitch reflexively, but compared with the painful experience of itching but unable to scratch, this little pain was nothing at all. Several mechanical arms hung down from the top of the workbench and unfastened Quinn's body. The exhausted Quinn lay on the workbench, with his long tongue drooping from his open mouth and stuck to the workbench below, without moving for a long time. Alive meow. Beija curiously jumped to Quinn, who was lying down, and pulled his head with a small claw. Quinn gave Beija a sideways glance. I can't speak. Big brother, I hate you. Okay, don't complain. Kraft waved at Quinn, who was still pretending to be dead. Come and let me test the effectiveness of the locator. If there is no problem, your armor will be ready soon. Ends. Come here. The dying dog jumped up from the workbench in an instant, jumped to Kraft's side in 3 steps, and wagged his tail frantically. The production speed of heavy armor is much faster than Beige's nano armor, so soon, Quinn also obtained his own armor, which was named Screaming by Kraft. This name is mainly because he heard the news of Monkey King from Martin yesterday, which made him think of the snarling dog, so he replaced the previously expected name, Joy. Although the main idea of this suit is actually from a gorilla named Winston, the color scheme has not been changed too much. After all, the snarling dog is also white in mythology. Quinn, who had obtained the battle armor, couldn't wait to dress up, and then flew to the sky to chase and fight in the laboratory with Beige. Kraft didn't care about the games of these two little guys, but continued to design on the computer. Now that there are more and more superhero and supercriminals appearing inexplicably, Martin's super ability is not enough, so Kraft decided to give him the whole battlesuit or something. And Peter Parker, the tights he wore last night were really hot-eyed, and Kraft decided to mercifully prepare one for him. "Hey, Peter, what's the matter with you?" Dr. Kurt Connors patted Peter Parker, who was wandering, and asked with concern. "Is it too tired recently? Or I will give you 2 days off." No. Thank you for your concern, Dr. Connors." Peter waved his hand after he came back to his senses. "I'm fine, that's, a little distracted." With the help of his friend Harry Osborn, Peter Parker interviewed the Osborn Group investment and led by Dr. Kurt Connors for an internship on the research of cross-species genetics leading to human limb regeneration, and obtained his outstanding performance. Approval of Dr. Connors. In addition to fighting crime as Spider-Man, Peter Parker spends most of his free time here, and Mary Jane has some complaints about this. But the reason why Peter at the moment was distracted was not because of Mary Jane, but because of the question about Martin Lee, which is Mr. Negative's, 2 days ago. "Mind if you have a chat with me?" Dr. Connors noticed that something was going on in Peter's heart. He stopped working and sat opposite Peter. "Maybe I can give you some advice." Peter hesitated for a while, but decided to find someone to talk to him and see if he can get the answer by the way. If your relatives and friends have to carry out some, illegal activities for some special reasons, but if you stop him, you are likely to harm him, what will you do? Vaguely telling Martin's question to Dr. Connors, Peter looked at him hopefully. "Oh, it's actually this type of problem." Dr. Connors smacked his lips. As a former military doctor, he had seen similar things several times. Many people in the army violated military orders for their own reasons and had to be wanted on their backs, so he has his own way of this kind of thing. The opinion of, "If it were me, as long as he didn't hurt the innocent a lot, I would treat it as invisible." Connors patted Peter on the shoulder. "Maybe it's a bit selfish to say that, but I'm more inclined to stand by myself. On the other hand, if I feel uncomfortable, then I will try to prevent him from causing more damage, or make up for those who have been affected, instead of betraying my relatives and friends." Stop and make up. Peter's eyes lit up, and he suddenly understood what he was going to do. Most of those gangs are dead, and he can pretend not to see it, but if Mr. Film does anything that harms innocent people, then he must stop it. "Thank you, Dr. Connors. You can figure it out." Dr. Connors patted Peter on the shoulder again. "So, now we can continue our research?" "Definitely." Peter Parker, who was re-energized, devoted himself to the experiment, and quickly derives a previously unfinished formula. "I have a hunch, this direction is correct." After some experiments, although the white mouse's severed limbs still did not fully grow out, it has made significant progress. Connors excitedly placed his face on the top of the protective box, and his right hand finally hoped to come back. "But Dr. Connors, the state of this little white mouse seems to be something wrong." Compared with the excited Kurt Connors, Peter Parker was able to look at the results of the experiment more calmly. The white mouse injected with the drug grew a little bit of claws and looked very irritable, which reminded him of Mr. Negative's, and the green giant that appeared in the previous 2 years. "Maybe it just hurts too much." Dr. Connors didn't heed Peter Parker's reminder, but continued to look at the mouse in the protective box with a feverish expression on his face. "We are about to succeed, Peter. This will be a huge amounts of milestone in biological science. I think you'd better observe it, Doctor." Peter grabbed Dr. Connors' arm and shook it vigorously. "Your current state is not suitable for further research." "Oh. You are right. Dr. Connors rubbed his head vigorously, rubbing his hair into a mess, and then calmed down a little. "That's it for today, Peter. We will optimize this formula tomorrow." Sorry, Dr. Connors, I may have been busy these 2 days." Peter said embarrassingly that he had just been dismissed by Dr. Connors, and he had to turn his head and leave when he needed help, which made him feel a little embarrassed. "Is it because of Mary?" Dr. Connors blinked and said with a smile. "Hey, boy. What's so sorry about that? You have helped me enough today, and I can handle the rest of the experiment myself. You should take more time to coax your girlfriend. Then I will leave first. Under Connor's teasing, Peter stroked the back of his head shyly, and then left Osborne's laboratory. After he left, Dr. Kurt Connors looked at the mouse madly hitting the glass with some entanglement, and then lowered his head to look at his only right arm. I adjust the formula one more time, and then go to rest. Kurt Connors murmured, and walked to the test bench again. Peter Parker didn't know that Dr. Connors had reinvested in the experiment. After dealing with Aunt May and Mary on the phone, he put on the Spider-Man tights with spicy eyes he made and started secretly investigate the Demon Gang. After a few days, Peter Parker looked at the information he had investigated, and was once again in entanglement. The Devil Gang participates in many businesses. Basically, they do everything that the general gangs do, such as collecting protection fees, reselling arms, smuggling cultural relics, skin and meat business, casinos, lending, etc., except for drug sales and human trafficking. Involved, but compared to most gangsters, most of the Devil Gang's business has been considered quite restrained. In the Sin City of New York, even if there is no Demon Gang, there are still other gangsters infecting these businesses, and Martin Lee is already a more bottom line because of his character integration. See you Peter Parker in Hell's Kitchen, the gangsters that have ever been counted as one, and they are basically much more cruel than the Demon Gang. So Peter Parker is not sure whether to disrupt their business, especially the Devil's Gang hurts very few innocent people. Those who were bankrupted because of pornography, gambling and drugs. Even if there is no Devil's Gang, there will be no change in the end. Compared with the Hell's Kitchen where the gun battles are endless, Chinatown under the control of the Devil Gang is really a paradise, and it is even better than most neighborhoods in New York in terms of public order.
When Peter Parker was struggling, the phone he used to communicate with the New York police suddenly rang.
Hi, this is Spider-Man. After being reminded by Kraft, Peter Parker deliberately changed his voice while using the Spider-Man identity. I'm Bill. Spider-Man, we need your help. Police officer Bill's voice was heard on the phone, in addition to a lot of noise and intermittent gunfire. What happened? Peter Parker quickly changed himself into a Spider-Man uniform while talking to Bill. Lizard monster. A lizard monster appeared near the Osborn building. He is frantically attacking civilians. Hold on. I am here. The lizard monster is still near the Osborn building. Peter Parker jumped out of the window with an ominous premonition in his heart. I hope it's not what I think.